Chapter 1459 Great Opportunity. Chapter 1459 Great Opportunity. What great opportunity am I going to receive? Ling Han was also eager to know. The golden boulder continued to glow, and Ling Han discovered that the boulder beneath his feet was actually melting. It was as if it were becoming water. Meanwhile, it was as if he were about to sink into this water. During this process, Ling Han had even considered escaping into the Black Tower. After all, this was an unpredictable event. Although the Sunken Abyss Valley was renowned as a place to obtain great opportunities, Ling Han was still afraid of the what if. Ling Han had entered many ancient sites before, and which time hadn't he come across some rare opportunity? However, these opportunities had all come with a serving of disaster. Take, for example, the Devil's Sky Mystery Realm, where the Azura Demon Emperor had escaped from. There was also the Heavenly Sea Mystery Realm, where he had come across Demon Master Zhenyi. Then there was the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, where he had almost been screwed over by the Notionless Saint. Indeed, Ling Han had a habit of coming across rare opportunities that were accompanied by dangers that could screw him over. Thus, he didn't dare to let his guard down at this moment. No one had ever ascended this peak before, so it was in his best interests to remain alert and wary. Fortunately, he was simply sinking into the melting rock. No other danger swooped down at him. Eventually, his entire body was enveloped by the rock. It was also at this moment that he appeared in a strange place. This place was dotted with stars, though these stars were definitely not real. They seemed to be close enough to touch, yet they also seemed to be far away on the horizon at the same time. Meanwhile, he was treading through the void, though it felt as if he were walking on solid ground. He didn't feel any emptiness and weightlessness. Surprisingly, there was actually an independent space inside the gigantic golden boulder. Ling Han continued to advance, yet his surroundings didn't change no matter how far he walked. He was still surrounded by the void and a plethora of stars. "Where's my great opportunity?" Ling Han shouted. "Is there anyone here?" After shouting this, even he wanted to laugh at his own stupidity. "Yes." At this moment, however, someone actually responded to his question. Ling Han's heart jolted, and he solemnly asked, "Who's there?" "Someone who's already been dead for a long, long time," the voice replied. Heh. Ling Han wasn't easily convinced by this reply. In this day and age, there were far too many dead people crawling out and running all over the place. "How should I refer to you, Senior?" he asked. "Me." The voice faltered for a moment before continuing. "I'm called Huyu. Now that I think about it, I'm a person who died tens of billions of years ago." "Then for what reason has Senior summoned me to this place?" Ling Han asked. "To bestow upon you a great opportunity," Huyu replied. Ling Han was unflustered, and he calmly asked, "Dare I ask, what is this great opportunity that you speak of?" Huyu replied with a question, asking, "Brat, do you know that there's another realm transcendent above the immortal realm?" Ling Han was slightly astonished. Could it be that this dead elite had also come from the celestial realm? This was extremely likely. After all, even the Star Sands Saint was unable to do anything about this place. Just this alone was enough to prove that the creator of this place was at least at the level of Saint King. Once one advanced past the level of Saint King, they would reach the level of the Severing Mundane tier. However, this was a tier that could only exist in the Celestial Realm. "Celestial Realm?" Ling Han replied with a chuckle. "Huh! You know about the existence of the Celestial Realm? Perhaps you're the descendant of a tribe that was banished?" Huyu was astonished, and he couldn't help but ask about Ling Han's background. Tribes that were banished? The ancient divine tribes were tribes that were banished? The Faceless tribe and Nine Snake tribe all possessed incredibly powerful bloodlines. Meanwhile, it was extremely likely that Ding Ping and Jiuyao were also the descendants of some ancient divine tribe. As for Gu Daoi, there was no question that he was from the Celestial Realm. Truth be told, he was actually one of the ancestors of the ancient divine tribes, a first-generation elite from the Celestial Realm. However, these powerful tribes and bloodlines had actually been banished from the Celestial Realm? Ling Han remained silent. In fact, he only knew very little about the ancient divine tribes. Similarly, he didn't know much about the celestial realm, either. As such, his best choice was naturally to remain silent. The more he spoke, the more likely it was that he would make a mistake. You didn't become suspicious, he said. Since you're aware of the existence of the celestial realm, I don't need to waste any more time explaining. I can gift you a rare treasure from the celestial realm as well as a secret technique from the celestial realm. However, in exchange, you need to help me kill someone. Whom do you want me to kill? Ling Han asked. Why don't you explain in more detail? I don't have a habit of wantonly killing innocent people. Unless they deserve to die, I'd rather forfeit whatever inheritance it is that you wish to bestow upon me. In any case, the Black Tower was already the most powerful rare treasure of the celestial realm, one of the most powerful, at the very least. Thus, Ling Han wasn't overly greedy when it came to the so-called rare treasures of the celestial realm. He wouldn't abandon his principles and stoop below his own bottom line to obtain these rare treasures. Ha ha! Huyu laughed heartily and said, Very well, very well. I very much like people of principle. Since this is the case, let me tell you a story. He paused for a moment before starting to tell his story. I'm the last member of the Hu clan. 10 billion years ago, the specific time has already become fuzzy. Great unrest swept throughout the entire celestial realm. Countless forces, including some of the most powerful forces, were all subject to existential catastrophes. All of them were banished from the celestial realm. Although my Hu clan couldn't be regarded as a first-rate force of the celestial realm, it was still powerful enough to be regarded as a mighty regional force. There were severing mundane tier grand elders in my clan. Moreover, my clan had also obtained a rare treasure before. However, after countless years of investigation, we were still unable to determine the usage of this rare treasure. During the period of great unrest, the Hu clan wisely chose to protect itself, not participating in the battles. However, one of the clans, Huyu's voice suddenly became cold, and it was as if he were gritting his teeth in anger. They maliciously targeted and smeared my Huyu's name, claiming that we were a supporter of the great unrest. As a result, a supreme elite descended to massacre the entire Hu clan. What that clan wanted was the rare treasure that my clan had obtained. They had been an intimate friend of our clan before, yet when our defenses were down, they suddenly turned around to stab us in the back. I was only able to escape death because I had been out adventuring and training at the time. After learning of this news, I immediately returned to the ancestral grounds to retrieve that rare treasure. Although that clan searched many times, they were completely unable to find the whereabouts of the rare treasure. However, they continued to keep an eye out, eventually discovering my existence. They then turned their attention onto me, starting to hunt me down relentlessly. Taking the rare treasure with me, I eventually fled from the celestial realm. However, I was severely wounded during this process, and I eventually succumbed to my wounds. However, a wisp of my damaged soul actually fused together with the rare treasure. It was only then that I finally discovered the true use of the rare treasure. It was a shame that it was already too late. With the support of this rare treasure, my wisp of damaged soul was able to survive for generation after generation. I lived on for no other reason but to search for a supreme prodigy, someone who could one day enter the celestial realm and exact revenge from my Hu clan. Huyu's voice had become shrill, and it was clear that he was filled with boundless fury. After listening to his story, it was clear that he had indeed suffered immensely. Ling Han mulled over this for a moment before saying, Then this sunken abyss valley should actually be called the Deep Injustice Valley. That's indeed the case, Huyu replied. I could only channel a limited amount of power of the rare treasure and transform the environment of heaven and earth in this area. Doing so allowed me to attract generation after generation of prodigies to this place. Now, after so many years, a suitable candidate has finally appeared before me. I don't ask for you to kill all of the enemies of the Hu clan, just the leader of their betrayal. Make a vow to the Tao of heaven and earth that you'll definitely complete this task. After taking this vow, I'll give you the rare treasure and also teach you the ultimate technique of the Hu clan. If everything is as Senior has said, I'll definitely exact revenge for the Hu clan when I enter the celestial realm and become powerful enough. Ling Han raised his hand and completed a Dao oath. The higher one's cultivation level, the more serious taking a Dao oath would become. This was because powerful elites could already rouse the regulations of heaven and earth. In other words, it was as if they were being watched over by an eye in the heavens. Very well, Hu Yu said with a hearty laugh. It was as if he could already see his mortal enemies being obliterated into ashes. Chapter 1469 Heaven's Flame. Chapter 1469 Heaven's Flame. The mortal enemy of the Hu clan is Dark Moon City's Ding clan. Hu Yu gritted his teeth as he said this, his voice filled with fury and resentment. What? The Ding clan? Ling Han's heart shuddered. Could this be Ding Yaolong's and Ding Zizhen's Ding clan? He didn't have time to ask, as Hu Yu had already channeled the rare treasure and started to funnel it toward him. This is the Nine Heavens Flame, and it's sealed inside this golden rock. External forces are unable to shatter this rock. This is a rare treasure that the Hu clan obtained from an ancient historical site. There are 100 types of origin flames in the immortal realm, yet at their core, these flames are all descended from 9 types of flames from the celestial realm. These 9 flames are called the 9 great ancestral flames, and these are the ancestors of all the flames in the world. The 9 heavens flame is one of these ancestral flames. Of course, this flame here is only a young flame of the 9 heavens flame. It's only just been born, and thus it doesn't possess a terrifying might. Moreover, it's been sealed into this sunstone by an ancient great elite. I'll refine it into your body now. When you manage to fully refine this young flame and transform it into your source flame, this wisp of 9 heavens flame will eventually grow into an ancestral flame. At that time, you'll gain unimaginable power. It's a shame that my damaged soul was only able to enter this sunstone after my death. It was only then that I finally managed to learn of its power. Stay focused and cooperate with me. This 9 heavens flame is an ancestral flame, and it still possesses a profound power even though it's only a young flame, and even though it's sealed inside a sunstone. If you're not careful, you'll be incinerated into ashes. Fuck. Hu Yu was still speaking, yet he was suddenly shocked to such an extent that he couldn't help but curse. He couldn't help himself. After all, the sight before him was far too astounding. The 9 heavens flame was being casually absorbed and refined by Ling Han, gradually fusing into his life force into the portion that represented fire. This was far too casual. This was far too smooth. In Hu Yu's estimation, it should have taken Ling Han at least 1 million years to completely refine the 9 heavens flame. This was an ancestral flame, after all, something that even the mighty figures of the celestial realm would fight over. Why was it so gentle and obedient right now? Little did he know that Ling Han had already tempered his body inside the immortal flames provided by the Black Tower numerous times. In fact, he had already tempered his body so much that he had mastered the secret technique, rising from the ashes. Right now, Hu Yu was telling him to refine an immortal flame, an ancestral flame. Yet, in reality, the might of this flame was far inferior to the might of the flames of immortal phoenixes. That being the case, what difficulty would Ling Han face when refining it? Countless divine patterns materialized across Ling Han's body, their complicated patterns far beyond any other technique that he had mastered. In fact, these weren't divine patterns, but celestial patterns. Boom! Scorching flames burst from Ling Han's body, transforming into numerous immortal phoenixes. Under the stimulation of the ancestral flame, his grasp of the secret technique, rising from the ashes, was currently advancing at a rapid pace. In the past, he could only rise from the ashes once. Afterward, he would need to spend a long time recovering the power of his life force before he could use the secret technique again. However, following his rapid advance, he now saw the potential to activate rising from the ashes twice in a row, perhaps even thrice. Of course, right now was still too early for him to achieve this. At this moment, he was working toward being able to use rising from the ashes twice in a row. In any case, he had only just discovered this potential. Have I come across a freak? Hu murmured to himself. Ling Han's talent was so great that he could be regarded as a top-notch prodigy, even in the celestial realm. Generally speaking, only the true sons and true daughters of top-notch sects could exhibit such tremendous talent. In fact, these prodigies might not even give him a shred of attention, even if he retrieved the entire wealth of the Wu clan. Of course, this was under the condition that he didn't reveal the 9 heavens flame. Yet, in this backward and primitive world, there was actually a prodigy who was just as talented as the true sons and true daughters of the celestial realm. This astonished him greatly. At the same time, it also delighted him immensely. The Hu clan can finally exact its revenge. In reality, he had actually been more eager to see Gu Daoyi achieve victory. After all, this was a divine fetus who was no weaker than any prodigy in the celestial realm. However, it was a shame that Gu Daoyi hadn't managed to make it to the peak. Now, however, he was filled with delight. Ling Han was no weaker than Gu Daoyi. I'll teach you the ultimate technique of the Hu clan as you refine the 9 heavens flame, Hu Yu said joyfully. I'll imprint it into your mind so that you can slowly comprehend it in the future. Regarding our revenge, this isn't a pressing matter. It's better that you act after coming up with a suitable plan. Although the Ding clan isn't a large clan in the celestial realm, with severing mundane tier grand elders being their most powerful elites, there still exists an insurmountable gulf between celestials and immortals. Even if you're a supreme prodigy, it'll still be incredibly difficult to defeat those grand elders. Moreover, the Ding clan has elites at the 4th severance of the severing mundane tier. Their power is incredibly terrifying. As if he were afraid that Ling Han didn't understand, he continued to explain this concept, saying, Celestials are different from mortals or immortals. In order to reach the celestial level, one must sever all of their mundane and worldly desires. The first severs heaven, the second earth, the third love, and the 4th karma. After severing these mundane matters, one will naturally become a being of themselves. In other words, one will become their own heaven and earth. After succeeding in the first one will advance to the low extreme of the severing mundane tier. Such elites are also referred to as 1st Severance Grand Elders. The Ding clan has 4th Severance Grand Elders, and this corresponds to a cultivation at the consummate level of the severing mundane tier. These are old freaks who have cultivated for heaven knows how many years. Before you have the absolute confidence to defeat them, you definitely can't reveal your identity. Otherwise, you'll place yourself into perilous danger. Ling Han couldn't speak at this moment, and his mind was more so swimming with all kinds of mystical symbols. These were the symbols of the Hu clan's ultimate technique. In fact, he couldn't even use his divine sense to communicate. All he could do was remain silent and listen. Great Evolution Technique. Darkness of the Paramount Night. Sword of Mundane Washing Rain. Dark Grief Origin Dragon Destruction. Song of the Ages. Countless secret techniques whirled inside Ling Han's mind. However, not all of them were celestial-level secret techniques. The Hu clan was only at the same level as the Ding clan, with both of them being severing mundane tier forces. Thus, only a limited number of their techniques were celestial-level secret techniques. The remaining techniques were all Genesis tier secret techniques. However, one of the celestial techniques astonished Ling Han greatly. In fact, this secret technique further strengthened his belief that this was indeed the Ding clan of Ding Zizhen and Ding Yaolong. Song of the Ages. Not Tide of the Ages, but Song of the Ages. However, there was definitely an intimate relationship between these two celestial techniques. Moreover, one of the mystical symbols caused Ling Han to feel a strong sense of familiarity. If he comprehended this symbol under the reincarnation tree, he would be able to completely understand it after comprehending it for 100 years of real time. This celestial technique is more powerful. The Tide of the Ages only possessed a single ability to age the attacks of the opponent. However, Song of the Ages could do even more than that. It could reverse the passage of time, allowing one to look into the past. In fact, this ability could even allow one to predict the future. This was the complete version of the celestial technique. The Ding clan had most likely raided the Hu clan and obtained a copy of this celestial technique. Afterward, with the passing of time, this celestial technique had eventually become the bloodline inheritance of the Ding clan, the Tide of the Ages. This also revealed that Ding Zizhen had most likely died far after the destruction of the Hu clan. Powerful celestial techniques could be fused into one's bloodline and passed down onto future generations. However, following the destruction of the Hu clan, the Psalm of the Ages had eventually become an ultimate technique of the Ding clan. This was truly a twist of fate that would make one sigh with pity. The Nine Heavens flame took root inside Ling Han's body, becoming his source flame. During this process, his cultivation naturally advanced as well. This was because the ancestral flame was far too powerful and high-level. Even though it was only fusing with Ling Han, it still brought him boundless and immeasurable benefits. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the king tiers in the second stage were still bathed in the sweet dew and the blessings of heaven and earth. In fact, this blessing of heaven and earth was bestowed by the Sunstone. This was a rare treasure of the celestial realm, so even an iota of its power was enough to bring great benefits to the cultivators of the immortal realm, and allow them to undergo astonishing transformations. It's already been half a month, so why has it still not concluded yet? In the past, it would have concluded after a maximum of 10 days. Could it be because someone ascended that gigantic golden boulder? These people are so fortunate. Some people are also incredibly unfortunate. The incredibly unfortunate people naturally included Zi Chenfeng, Long Xiangyue, second in the world, and the other rank 3 king tiers. In stark contrast to them, Gu Daoi was able to receive the blessings of heaven and earth because he had been locked in an intense battle with Empress Luanxing at the time. His divine fetus was profoundly mysterious, and it was as if he were about to hover away with the wind and directly ascend into the celestial realm. 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. The blessings of heaven and earth continued to shower the prodigies in the second stage of the valley. In fact, this mysterious event even astonished a saint, who personally traveled over to check on the situation. Only after confirming that there was no harm being done to the prodigies did he leave the sunken abyss valley. 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Time slowly crept by. Most people had already left, yet their shock still had yet to dissipate. The blessings of heaven and earth were far too astonishing this time. Those who had reached the second stage of the competition were destined to soar far above all other prodigies. This was already the case with the prodigies in the second stage, so what about Ling Han? Chapter 1461 Twofold Heavenly Tribulation. Chapter 1461 Twofold Heavenly Tribulation. 10 years slowly crept by. Humans were forgetful beings, and thus there was already very little attention on what was going on in the sunken abyss valley. Even though such astounding events had occurred there 10 years ago, even astonishing a saint, many people had already become accustomed to its current state. The cultivators who had successfully reached the second stage were still bathing in the blessing of heaven and earth that was exuded by the Sunstone, tempering their bodies. The most evident sign of this was their physique, where a sheen of light was continuously pulsating. It was possible that they could master the legendary Sun physique, a physique that could unleash a dazzling glow when they were battling against their opponents. Not only could this glow affect their opponent's vision, but it could even trick their divine sense. This was an incredibly powerful physique. Moreover, physiques that were mastered later in life and not naturally possessed wouldn't affect one's original bloodline or physique. In other words, they could be viewed as a mystical power. Thus, this would bring huge benefits to all of the cultivators in the second stage. However, one person was different. Gu Daoi. This was because he had already mastered a mystical power, dazzle the heavens, in his first life. This mystical power had similar effects to the Sun physique. Thus, even though he had now combined the two mystical powers, elevating the might of the former, the benefit that he had received from this was far inferior to that of the other cultivators. After all, they had learned a new mystical power, whereas he had simply seen some slight improvement in his own mystical power. This was still better than nothing though, just that his improvement was far too minute. 1. At this moment, the light that was enveloping the valley suddenly vanished. Everyone opened their eyes at the same time. The blessings of heaven and earth had finally come to an end. "I think I've mastered an incredible mystical power!" Gasp! I actually advanced from the early stage of the medium extreme to the middle stage of the medium extreme. Me too. I advanced from the middle stage of the high extreme to the late stage of the high extreme. My physique has grown stronger, and it seems like I can absorb spiritual chi and sense the existence of heaven and earth with far more ease. The cultivators all shouted in delight and astonishment. After absorbing the blessings of heaven and earth for 10 years, all of them had experienced tremendous improvements. Gu Daoyi was slightly baffled at first. However, killing intent quickly spread across his face as he looked at the gigantic golden boulder in the sky. He felt like his great opportunity had been stolen from him. His divine fetus had indeed advanced slightly, yet this improvement wasn't especially great. Moreover, receiving the sun physique was completely negligible for him. In addition, he had already reached the barrier of the peak stage of the heavenly body tier, so unless he advanced to the eternal river tier, he would barely see any improvements in his cultivation. If the benefits received by the others were given a score of 10 out of 10, then the benefits that he had received would only score a maximum of 1 out of 10. More detestable was the fact that Ling Han might have received benefits that scored 100 out of 10. He was seething with killing intent. Regardless of what benefits Ling Han had received, he would definitely steal them away from him. This great fortune could only belong to him. Boom! He soared into the sky. The sunken abyss valley had already returned to normal at this moment, so he could naturally use the ability of flight. In his eyes, a distance of 3,000 meters was nothing, and he covered this distance in the blink of an eye. He then ruthlessly lashed out, swiping his palm at the gigantic golden boulder. At that time, he had clearly seen Ling Han being absorbed into the gigantic golden boulder. Moreover, he believed that Ling Han was still inside. Now that he was attacking an unprepared Ling Han, he was convinced that he could severely injure or even kill him. After all, he wasn't at the low extreme of the heavenly body tier anymore. Rather, he had already regained his normal cultivation. He was at the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and he possessed the ability to kill even elites at the low extreme of the eternal river tier. "You dare?" Empress Wenxin dashed over to block him. "Stop!" The Rain Emperor also lashed out. "You dare to disrespect my master?" Ding Ping and Zhu also charged over. Although Su Ran, the notionless saint, and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden didn't speak, they also launched attacks toward Gu Daoyi. "Do you think you can stop me?" Gu Daoyi said with a sneer. He had already regained his power now, and he more so possessed the divine fetus and 10 lifetimes of mystical power. Who in the heavenly body tier could stop him? He simply made a pressing motion with his left hand to defend against their attacks. Meanwhile, his right hand continued to slap toward the gigantic golden boulder. He was exuding a mighty aura as he battled against 7 king tiers alone. Pun! There was a deafening rumble as Gu Daoyi's palms struck the gigantic golden boulder. At the same time, the gigantic golden boulder also started to crumble, disintegrating into millions upon billions of broken pieces. In fact, these disintegrating shards of rock were so small that they were invisible to the naked eye. The attacks of Empress Wenxin and the others arrived immediately afterward. However, Gu Daoyi's left hand transformed into a gigantic black demonic palm that blocked all of their ferocious attacks. However, Gu Daoyi frowned slightly as he raised his left hand. To his surprise, there were 3 fractures on his palm. One was caused by Empress Wenxin, one by the Rain Emperor, and one by the notionless saint. He couldn't help but feel astonished. There were actually 3 people who could wound him. He had underestimated them. However, the other cultivators in the abyss were even more stunned. 7 king tiers had attacked in unison, and among them, there were even the supreme king tiers, King Tier Assassin, and Fist Demon, yet they had only managed to draw a few streaks of blood from Gu Daoyi's palm? Gu Daoyi was truly a powerful being. He truly lived up to his name as the greatest prodigy of all eternity. However, many people also turned their gaze toward where the gigantic golden boulder had once been. In that spot, there was a person standing tall and proud. It was Ling Han. Had Gu Daoyi shattered the Sunstone? The answer was evidently negative. Not to mention that he was only at the heavenly body tier. He wouldn't have been able to shatter it even if he had regained the peak power of his past lives. Otherwise, wouldn't the Hu clan have obtained the 9 heavens flame tens of billions of years ago? In fact, it was because its essence had already been completely absorbed that the Sunstone had become so weak and brittle. Since it had lost its essence and become an ordinary stone, it was naturally extremely weak, and would shatter under a single strike. Ling Han's eyes were shut, and there was still a wealth of information whirling about in his mind. He still had yet to come to his senses. The 9 heavens flame had already taken root and become a part of his life force. Although it was still a young flame, it would grow along with his cultivation. In the future, its power would astound even celestial kings. Kwang! There was the rumble of thunder as dark clouds rolled over and arcs of brilliant white lightning intertwined across the sky. That layer of dark clouds, those 1,000-meter-long arcs of lightning. All of these caused a feeling apprehension to rise in the cultivators' hearts. Is this an apocalypse? Why is it so terrifying? The cultivators all shook their heads. Although many of them had advanced in cultivation, none of them had managed to advance to the next minor level. This was a barrier that they had to comprehend and overcome by themselves. Thus, this wasn't heavenly tribulation for them. They were all extremely curious. Whose tribulation was this? It was far too devastating. Gu Daoyi still wanted to attack, yet he had no option but to forcefully suppress his urge. He discovered that this was Ling Han's heavenly tribulation. However, this tribulation was far too terrifying, so much so that even he felt apprehensive about it. If he interfered, it was very likely that he would die. He was beside himself with shock. How could there exist such a formidable heavenly tribulation? However, Ling Han wasn't surprised in the least. This was because he had already advanced to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. As such, this was a twofold heavenly tribulation that he was facing. That being the case, its might was naturally far greater than normal. Why didn't his heavenly tribulations arrive one after the other? This was because the Sunstone had severed the senses of heaven and earth. Ordinary stones naturally couldn't achieve this. However, this was a celestial stone, meaning that the level of its existence was far transcendent above that of the immortal realm. Thus, it was naturally possible for it to sever the senses of heaven. Kwang! Heavenly tribulation rapidly gathered above Ling Han. Before long, a bolt of lightning that measured 300 meters in width violently struck down, directly striking at Ling Han's head. This was twofold heavenly tribulation, and the might of its whole was far greater than the sum of its parts. In fact, it was 10 times more powerful. Pa! The cultivators witnessed everything clearly. After a single strike, Ling Han's body had already become a broken mess of ripped flesh and shattered bones. He's died just like that. Although this heavenly tribulation is indeed powerful, isn't it far too pathetic to die after just a single strike? He didn't even put up a struggle. However, Gu Daoyi's expression became even more solemn. He possessed a divine fetus, and thus he could sense Ling Han's condition even through the powerful tribulation. Ling Han hadn't died. His aura still remained. In fact, Ling Han had actively shattered his own body in order to be tempered by the heavenly tribulation. He was an absolute freak. Chapter 1462 Certain Death. Chapter 1462 Certain Death. Just as Gu Daoyi suspected, Ling Han hadn't been pulverized because he was unable to withstand heavenly tribulation. Rather, he had actively shattered his own flesh and bones in order to be tempered by the tribulation. This way, he could further elevate the power of his physique. This time, however, things were slightly more difficult. After all, this was a twofold heavenly tribulation. When it came to normal cultivators, they would face perilous danger whenever they experienced heavenly tribulation. In fact, 7 to 8 people out of 10 would be killed by theirs. Yet, right now, Ling Han was experiencing a twofold tribulation, which was 10 times more powerful than an ordinary heavenly tribulation faced by those at the peak stage of the pinnacle level. Gu Dao felt a strong urge to attack. Right now, Ling Han's entire body was pulverized and broken. Thus, if he attacked, it was certain that he could kill Ling Han. However, the problem was that he was incredibly apprehensive of Ling Han's heavenly tribulation. If he interfered, it was very likely that he would die as well. Was he going to risk his own life in order to kill a mere ant? He shook his head. It wasn't worth it. He was confident that he could kill Ling Han after he successfully withstood his heavenly tribulation. Killing him would be like cutting grass. This was because he was Gu Dao, a king tier who possessed a divine fetus after burying the bodies of his 9 previous lives. He was destined to be invincible. He turned his gaze to Empress Wenxin. This was another person who was practicing the 9 deaths heaven art. If he could obtain and refine her fruits of cultivation, his divine fetus would definitely advance to the next level. At that time, even the true sons and true daughters of the great sects of the celestial realm wouldn't be able to rival his formidable might. Empress Wenxin humphed coldly as she charged over. This person actually dared to attack her lover? Even if there wasn't the matter pertaining to the 9 deaths heaven art, she would still feel the need to kill Gu Dao 100 times over. "You're seeking death," Gu Dao said with a humph. Now that he had regained his full power, who at the same cultivation level could rival him? Die. He also charged at Empress Wenxin, and the two of them quickly became locked in an intense battle again. However, the battle this time was far more ferocious and dangerous. They had both regained their power at the peak stage of the pinnacle level. In other words, their power was now on the same level as elites at the low extreme of the eternal river tier. However, coupled with their freakish talent, they could even kill elites at the early stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier, perhaps even the middle stage. Such was the intensity of the battle that many cultivators didn't even dare to spectate it from up close. In any case, they didn't have the right to. They had no choice but to retreat far into the distance. Otherwise, just a single shock wave would be enough to severely wound or even kill them. Meanwhile, the Rain Emperor and the others didn't interfere in this battle. It was beneath them to gang up on an opponent who was at the same cultivation level as them. It wasn't long before more king tiers arrived at the scene. These king tiers were none other than Long Xiangyue, second in the world, Hong Ma, and the others, the king tiers who had suffered great misfortune 10 years ago. After receiving news of the blessing of heaven and earth concluding, they naturally had to hurry over to witness the scenes by themselves. At the very least, they had to see what kind of benefits and great opportunities the others had received. The large black dog had also come. He was standing on his hind legs like a human, yet his appearance at this moment was truly peculiar and shocking. This was because he was wearing iron underwear. It was clear that he had been mentally scarred after having his little peepee grabbed at that time. With the protection of an invincible iron underwear, it was quite likely that his little peepee would be safe from attacks now. He clasped his front paws behind his back as he walked forward like a human. However, with his shiny pair of iron underwear, was this not a hilarious and comical sight? Many of the cultivators in the abyss had been cultivating in seclusion these past 10 years, so this was their first time seeing the large black dog in such a state. They couldn't help but splutter with laughter. Was this some sort of joke? Who's laughing? Who's laughing? Show yourself to Grandpa Dog. The large black dog was ticked off, and he instantly raised his paw and pointed in the direction of the laughter. Ha ha! However, his strong reaction elicited even more and louder laughter from the cultivators. In fact, some people were laughing so hard that they could barely stand up straight. Meanwhile, some of them already had tears streaming down their face. This large black dog was far too shameless and degenerate. Woof! Grandpa Dog is going to bite your bums into 3 pieces. The large black dog charged over in embarrassment and fury. The abyss instantly descended into chaos. Ling Han was facing heavenly tribulation, Empress Wenxin was locked in an intense battle with Gu Dao, and now the large black dog transformed into a rabid dog, biting anyone that he could get his mouth on. The abyss was plunged into turmoil. Ling Han had actively shattered his flesh and godly bones in order to be tempered by heavenly tribulation. However, he had genuinely gone slightly overboard this time. The divine lightning unleashed by the tribulation became more and more powerful, yearning to kill him with each strike. Heaven and earth couldn't be belittled. Ling Han had advanced 2 minor levels before exiting the Sun Stone to face the tribulation. This was an act of deception toward heaven and earth. Thus, he naturally had to face the punishment of heaven and earth. Heavenly tribulation became more and more powerful. It had already been descending for more than half a day. In fact, it still continued to descend even after an entire day had passed. Ling Han felt that this wasn't a good sign. In the beginning, he had only been struggling slightly. However, he had still been able to withstand it without any problems. Yet, this heavenly tribulation was becoming more and more powerful with each lightning strike that it unleashed. So be it if it had only lasted for only half a day. In fact, Ling Han could have endured it even if it had lasted for an entire day. After all, this was a twofold heavenly tribulation. However, a day had already passed, yet this tribulation still had yet to show any sign of abating and dissipating. Instead, it was becoming even more powerful. What was the meaning of this? He circulated a drop of indestructible true fluid to reform his godly bones. He then started to resist heavenly tribulation with his full power. There was already no need to temper his body anymore. This was because his physique had already become more powerful than level 13 godly metal. This was the limit of what he could achieve at his current cultivation level. Moreover, his tribulation was also becoming increasingly terrifying, and thus he needed to defend against its attacks with his full might and power. Gasp! The surrounding cultivators were all stunned. Who had ever witnessed such a long heavenly tribulation before? Heavenly tribulation half a day long was already overwhelming enough to kill most cultivators. A tribulation 1 day long was simply unfathomable. Yet, Ling Han's tribulation had already lasted for longer than a day. If they hadn't witnessed this with their own eyes, who would have believed it? This is a situation of certain death. But if he can survive this tribulation, his future prospects will definitely be boundless. Several elderly seniors remarked on this astonishing scene. Ling Han had enraged the heavens and provoked them to unleash the most powerful punishments of divine lightning. However, if he could withstand this formidable punishment, he would undoubtedly be blessed with tremendous luck and fortune. Fortune couldn't be touched, nor could it be seen. However, it was something that no one was able to ignore. In fact, its importance was arguably above that of all other matters. After all, if one was blessed with great fortune, perhaps they might receive a divine pill that allowed them to become a celestial straight away. If that were the case, how many king tiers and supreme prodigies would they surpass? Ling Han started to struggle more and more. The might of his heavenly tribulation had already surpassed the early stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier long ago. At the half-a-day mark, it had already reached the medium extreme. After reaching the 1 day mark, it had already grown to the high extreme. Right now, it was even advancing toward the late stage of the high extreme. Theoretically speaking, this was a tribulation that could easily kill even elites at the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. So, how could Ling Han not feel the struggle? He gritted his teeth as he continued to withstand its attacks, unleashing all of his most powerful techniques. The technique that he unleashed the most was naturally the Tide of the Ages. This was a celestial technique that could age and deconstruct attacks. Although it wasn't especially effective against the tribulation, any bit of help was welcome. Meanwhile, Ling Han also continued to furiously channel the indestructible Heaven Scroll, using this celestial cultivation technique to protect his body. This celestial cultivation technique was arguably the most powerful cultivation technique of the celestial realm. The indestructible Heaven Scroll had never been impressive when it came to offensive ability. However, when it came to defensive ability, Ling Han had never come across any cultivation technique that was more powerful than this. Blood continued to explode from Ling Han's body. In fact, even his level 13 godly bones were creaking and groaning as if they were about to collapse at any moment. However, There was a halo of golden light enveloping his body, allowing him to rapidly recover from his severe wounds. Undying and indestructible. The spectating cultivators were all stunned into silence. They had always known that Ling Han possessed a powerful and freakish physique. However, they hadn't known just how powerful or freakish it was. At this moment, they were finally able to witness its overwhelming might with their very own eyes. I definitely can't become enemies with this person in the future. His physique is far too fucking powerful. Even such a terrifying heavenly tribulation isn't able to kill him. Yet another 12 hours passed, and the might of the tribulation had already advanced to the peak stage of the low extreme. This caused even Ling Han to feel incredibly apprehensive. With a single strike, a large cloud of his blood exploded into the surrounding sky. After a few more strikes, it was inevitable that his godly bones would also be shattered. At that time, he would be in perilous danger. Is this the end? Chapter 1463 Seeking Life in the Midst of Death. Chapter 1463 Seeking Life in the Midst of Death. He's done for! The cultivators exclaimed as they shook their heads. However, they were genuinely impressed that he was able to withstand that devastating heavenly tribulation until now. What Ling Han was facing was the fury of heaven and earth. The power of humans was limited, yet the power of heaven and earth was unlimited. As such, how could he withstand the punishment of heaven and earth? Not a single person thought that Ling Han wasn't a prodigy. However, even so, there was little more that he could do. Before the might of heaven and earth, even Genesis tier saints had to bow their proud heads. If this weren't the case, saints should have been able to resist the fateful cycle of life, sickness, and death. They should have been able to transcend the regulations of heaven and earth. However, not only did saints have a limited lifespan, but they even had to face their own form of tribulation, immortals' tribulation. If they failed to withstand this, their life force would be mercilessly severed. This was enough to prove that heaven and earth could kill whomever they wanted. Once the will of heaven and earth was set, no one could possibly seek to change it. In any case, who told Ling Han to obtain such a great opportunity, advancing 2 minor levels at once? Now that he was facing a twofold heavenly tribulation, he had no option but to die with bitterness and regret. Moreover, who would have imagined that Ling Han's great opportunity would wound up becoming his great disaster? However, some people were extremely glad to witness his misfortune. Since they were unable to become a powerful king tier themselves, they took great joy in witnessing the death of those powerful king tiers. In fact, they yearned for everyone more powerful than themselves to be killed. That way, they would finally be able to make a name for themselves. This doesn't seem right. This brat isn't destined to die so young. The large black dog stopped chasing and biting people, standing up on his hind legs and clasping his front paws behind his back. An enigmatic aura emanated from him, and it was as if he were pondering a profound question. However, the sight of his iron underwear completely ruined his solemn and profound airs. Anyhow, he immediately revealed his true colors anyway, shaking his head and saying, "Forget about it. Whether he lives or dies has *T to do with Grandpa Dog." Ling Han's situation was becoming direr and direr. His heavenly tribulation was becoming increasingly powerful, and even with the protection of the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, the speed of his recovery was still far slower than the speed at which he was getting wounded. From his head to toe, it was almost impossible to find any piece of unshattered bone. However, he was still fighting, determination and tenacity in his eyes. He would never give up. He would fight until the last moment. He had already summoned his divine demon sword long ago, this sword radiating with a brilliant celestial light as it resisted the attacks of the tribulation. Even though it was only a level 11 god tool, it was radiating an aura that could sow apprehension in one's heart. It possessed a wisp of might that should have only existed in celestial tools. Under the tempering of the twofold heavenly tribulation, the divine demon sword was also able to undergo a comprehensive qualitative improvement. Ling Han continued to circulate drops of indestructible true fluid, speeding up the process of his recovery. However, the effects of the indestructible true fluid would decrease significantly when used in quick succession. It wasn't long before he consumed all 10 drops of indestructible true fluid. However, the twofold heavenly tribulation was still attacking him without mercy. Kwang! A bolt of lightning arced down, severing one of Ling Han's arms. Godly blood sprayed into the surroundings. However, this blood was full of vitality, and it provided nourishment to the piece of land that it fell on. The plants and trees in this area instantly grew with renewed vigor, shooting up 30 or so meters. Kwang! Another bolt of lightning descended, severing one of Ling Han's legs. Similar to before, a large swathe of land in the distance was transformed into an Elysian-like area. Countless godly medicines sprouted and grew, many of them reaching level 9 or even level 10. Kwang! This bolt of lethal lightning struck Ling Han's neck, almost ripping his body into two. Blood exploded from his body and rained down on the surrounding lands, providing the entire abyss with vitality and nourishment. The abyss transformed from a land of desolation into a land of lush greenery. Kwang! Heaven and earth were merciless, and they launched the killing blow. Pa! Ling Han was blasted into ashes. This time, Ling Han hadn't actively shattered his godly bones. Instead, he had genuinely been blasted into pieces. He's done for. A Supreme King Tier was killed just like that. This was a King Tier who could rival the power of Gu Daoi. Brilliant! Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi both sneered in delight. They had both been screwed over by Ling Han before. Even though they had reached the peak again, they had both fallen to the floor of the abyss again because of the hanging dog incident. In the end, they had failed to receive any benefits. Upon witnessing the death of Ling Han, they were naturally beside themselves with delight. It was as if they had eaten some sweet honey. With Ling Han dead, his heavenly tribulation naturally started to dissipate as well. However, just as the dark clouds started to dissipate, they immediately started to converge together again. What's going on? Everyone was confused by this sudden change. Perhaps heaven and earth wanted to mutilate his corpse? However, not even a single fiber of Ling Han's being was remaining. So, how could heaven and earth mutilate his non-existent corpse? Boom! They suddenly saw a burst of flames materializing in the sky. This flame then frenziedly spread throughout the sky, a figure gradually appearing from within it. This figure rapidly took shape before eventually stepping out. It's Ling Han! Holy fuck! Everyone opened their eyes as wide as they could upon seeing this, their heads completely numb with shock. He was clearly killed by heavenly tribulation, with not even an iota of his body remaining. In fact, even his tribulation had started to dissipate, so how has he come back from the dead? Ling Han slowly stepped forward, the boundless flames being absorbed into his body as he did so. His spirit and vitality were elevated to the extreme. Indestructible heaven's scroll, rising from the ashes. There was a solemn expression on his face. This was his most powerful trump card, so what would he do if he were still unable to withstand this twofold heavenly tribulation? Kwang! The tribulation continued to unleash violent strikes against him, the bolts of divine lightning becoming more and more powerful. This twofold heavenly tribulation had already lasted for almost 2 entire days. However, after unleashing a furious bolt of divine lightning, Ling Han's heavenly tribulation suddenly came to a stop, not unleashing any more attacks. Instead, the dark clouds dissipated, revealing the sun and bright sky that rested behind it. The terrifying heavenly tribulation had finally come to an end. Ling Han was riddled with wounds, and he heavily plunked down onto the ground. As strong as his willpower was, he still couldn't help but feel as if his body were about to collapse. Everyone gazed at him with respect and admiration in their eyes. In fact, there was even a hint of fear. It was as if they were looking at a freak, not a person. He had died, yet then come back to life again. Who had ever witnessed such an astounding scene before? Ling Han furrowed his brows. In order to overcome the heavenly tribulation, he had revealed his most powerful trump card in front of everyone else. As such, he would lose the element of surprise in the future. Fortunately, he still possessed another trump card. That was, of course, the Black Tower. It was even more indestructible than the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. In addition, he hadn't revealed the secret of the 9 Heavens Flame either. This was a trump card that was no weaker than the Black Tower. "Gu Daoyi, come battle me!" Ling Han shouted as he stood up. The battle between Gu Daoyi and Empress Wenxin had already reached a critical and intense stage. Moreover, Gu Daoyi was enjoying the advantage. Although Empress Wenxin was astonishingly powerful, she still couldn't overcome the tremendous power of Gu Daoyi, especially since he possessed a divine fetus. If it weren't for the brick in her hands, perhaps she would have already been defeated long ago. How could Ling Han watch on as his wife was being ruthlessly attacked? Gu Daoyi stopped his attacks and turned around to gaze at Ling Han. There was a wary look in his eyes. Even he would struggle if he were attacked by both Ling Han and Empress Wenxin. "You want to battle against me?" he asked in a menacing voice. "Although husband and wife are one, I won't bully you this time. Let us battle, one against one." Ling Han extended his arm, preparing to battle. Although he was bathed in blood, his aura instantly rose explosively at this moment. "A mere ant-like pun." Gu Daoyi was still expressing his disdain, yet Ling Han had already launched a punch toward him, forcing him to instantly swallow his words. He hurriedly retreated 900 or so meters. Again? Gu Daoyi was beside himself with fury. This was exactly the same as before. He had wanted to mock and ridicule Ling Han, yet his words were forced back into his mouth by Ling Han's attacks every single time. He couldn't string together a single complete sentence. Detestable! Gu Daoyi gave up on trying to ridicule Ling Han. He was going to kill Ling Han. Mystical power of 10 lives! The mystical powers of all his lifetimes were unleashed one after another. In the end, they all combined to form a devastating combination attack. 9 other clones of Gu Daoyi then appeared, each representing one of his past lives. Attacking in unison, they unleashed the 10 mystical powers which then surged toward Ling Han. This time, he was attacking while at his full power. Moreover, he even had a saint tool in his hands. He was tremendously powerful. Ling Han smiled calmly, not hiding his own power either. He immediately unleashed Heaven's might, forcefully suppressing Gu Daoyi's power by 2 stars. At the same time, he slashed down with his divine demon sword, sending brilliant celestial light into the surroundings. Raising his hand, boundless rays of divine light instantly shot outward, their brightness so great that the spectating cultivators could barely open their eyes. The cultivators in the second stage had mastered the sun physique with just a wisp of the sunstone's power. However, Ling Han had been cultivating inside this sunstone. Thus, the sum of the benefits received by all of the other cultivators was negligible before the benefits that Ling Han had received. It was also because of this that he had been able to advance from the early stage of the high extreme to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. In fact, if it weren't for the immense difficulty presented by the barrier to the eternal river tier, Ling Han could have advanced even further. However, if he had genuinely broken through to the eternal river tier, he would have been met with a 3-fold heavenly tribulation. If that had been the case, he definitely would have been killed. Gu Daoyi couldn't help but feel vexed. Chapter 1460 for Recruiting Disciples. Chapter 1460 for Recruiting Disciples. To other cultivators, obtaining the sun physique was something to be very happy about. However, to Gu Daoyi, obtaining this mystical power was essentially the same as obtaining nothing. At most, it could only elevate his power by a minuscule amount. However, once Ling Han unleashed his sun physique, it caused his dazzle the heavens' mystical power to appear dull and muted. One had to realize that the entire sun rock had almost all been refined by Ling Han alone. Thus, he possessed a sun physique that had reached the stage of great accomplishment. This sun physique wasn't the same as the sun physique of the other cultivators. Once it appeared, it unleashed a dazzling light and even a burst of scorching heat. In fact, the sunstone hadn't been used to just seal the 9 heavens flame. Rather, the 9 heavens flame had been born from within this sunstone, eventually growing into one of the 9 great ancestral flames. Indeed, this sunstone was a very freakish stone. Perhaps cultivating the sun physique to a stage of great accomplishment still wasn't enough for it to be qualified as a top-notch physique in the celestial realm. However, it was still definitely more powerful than Dazzle the Heavens. After all, Dazzle the Heavens was a mystical power that Gu Dao had mastered in his first life. Taking all of his mystical powers into account, only his divine fetus would be able to suppress Ling Han's sun physique. Gu Dao humphed coldly and said, "You've stolen my fortune and great opportunities. I'm definitely going to kill you." If he could obtain this physique, his Dazzle the Heavens would definitely elevate to a whole new level. Indeed, its improvement would certainly be far more than what he had received from the blessing of heaven and earth. Moreover, he had a feeling that Ling Han had received even more benefits than just this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have felt a sensation of apprehension just then. One had to realize that he possessed a divine fetus. What kind of precious treasure did Ling Han possess? It was something that could provoke even his divine fetus. "Dumb C***nt," Ling Han said with a cold sneer. He raised his divine demon sword, releasing a boundless sword chi as he did so. His aura was no weaker than that of Gu Dao. "Humph! You think I'm afraid of you?" Gu Dao roared as a brilliant light enveloped his body. Numerous symbols materialized on his body, and it was as if he had put on a suit of scaled armor. Surprisingly, he was able to obstruct the effect that was being released by Ling Han's heaven's might. However, this was only effective on his own body. The 9 clones that represented his 9 previous lives were still affected by the power of heaven's might. This was the power of his divine fetus. Ling Han's eyes lit up, and he immediately activated the Eye of Truth. He wanted to observe the symbols on Gu Douyi's body more closely. It was very likely that these symbols contained some of the secrets of his divine fetus, and it was very likely that they were celestial patterns. Such patterns had also materialized when he had been refining the 9 heavens flame. However, compared to those, the celestial patterns of Gu Douyi's divine fetus were naturally far inferior. After all, the 9 heavens flame was an ancestral flame of the celestial realm. It was an ancestral flame that could rival even celestial kings. However, Ling Han still couldn't comprehend these patterns. Ling Han felt that this was a pity. These celestial patterns were far too complicated. Even if he concentrated on just one, it would still take him an incredibly long time to comprehend and grasp. Moreover, there were at least tens of thousands of these celestial patterns. Forget about it. It's time to battle. Ling Han slashed his sword as he advanced toward Gu Dao. There was the rumble of thunder, and there was also the brilliance of the sun. However, Gu Dao was no pushover either. He had a saint tool in his hands, and his original body was more so at its full power. He was no weaker than Ling Han. Although the power of his 9 clones had all been suppressed by 2 stars, they could still unleash a devastating might when they released their mystical powers in unison. However, what kind of physique did Ling Han possess? He didn't dare to face the attack of Gu Douyi's 10th generation body and Saint Tool head-on. However, he couldn't care less about the 9 clones that represented Gu Douyi's 9 previous lives. So be it if their attacks struck him. At most, he would only receive some very minor injuries. Meanwhile, Gu Douyi also didn't dare to be struck by Ling Han's divine demon sword. This was a devastating sword that possessed immense destructive abilities. In fact, it was so powerful that it could even hack celestials to death. The 2 Supreme King tiers became locked in an intense battle. Their power was similar, and they continued to exchange blow after blow. Ling Han didn't unleash the 9 heavens flame. This was his trump card, and unless he was confident that he could kill Gu Dao, he definitely wouldn't unleash it. Right now, it was clear that he couldn't kill Gu Dao. They were on Woodfigure Planet right now, and thus they were all under the observation of the 10 saints of this planet. The divine senses of these saints were always watching over this planet. Cultivators like him, Gu Dao, second in the world, and the others were all the Supreme King tiers of their generation. Thus, how could these saints allow them to be killed? Apart from heavenly tribulation, which they couldn't interfere with, these saints would definitely appear to help if any of them was at risk of dying. That being the case, Ling Han obviously wouldn't reveal his trump cards prematurely. Sure enough, after exchanging several more blows, a saint suddenly appeared to stop the battle between Ling Han and Gu Daoyi. Under his saintly might, Ling Han and Gu Daoyi were unable to launch any more attacks. This was the case even though they were unafraid of his saintly might. Of course, this was only because they were incredibly powerful. Most of the other cultivators had already dropped to their knees. This was the 9 Azure Saint, the 9th disciple of the Star Sand Saint. At 300 million years old, he was also the youngest saint in the surrounding several hundred galaxies. It could be said that he was in his prime, and his chi and blood was at its most vigorous. He looked like a well-read middle-aged man, an indescribably graceful aura radiating from him even though his appearance was only ordinary. His aura was profound enough to move one's heart. This was a saint, someone who had reached the pinnacle of this realm. Thus, he naturally possessed a mighty and profound aura. When a saint was born, the heavens would rain a sweet dew to welcome their birth. When a saint died, the heavens would cry as the world grieved their passing. Everyone, immediately head to the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. The recruitment process is about to begin. The 9 Azure Saint waved his hand as he said this, enveloping all of the cultivators and flying them to the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. How quick was the speed of a saint! Moreover, this was under the condition that they weren't tearing apart and teleporting through space. Otherwise, they could arrive on another planet in a single stride. The Star Sand Martial Arts Academy appeared before their eyes. In fact, there were actually 9 campuses of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, each of them guarded by one of the Star Sand Saints' disciples. These saints would also be responsible for teaching the disciples in their own campus. Right now, they were at the 9th campus, the campus of the 9 Azure Saint. Sit here and wait. The recruitment process will begin in 3 days, the 9 Azure Saint announced. This was the request of a saint, and even someone as rebellious as Gu Daoyi didn't dare to go against his words. After all, he was only a measly cultivator at the heavenly body tier at this moment. A saint could kill him with a single thought. Everyone was very well behaved as they sat there quietly, waiting for 3 days to pass. Empress Wenxin and the others all ran over to Ling Han. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years. Ling Han embraced the heavenly phoenix divine maiden in his left arm and Empress Wenxin in his right arm. He then briefly filled them in about his encounters. Of course, he naturally couldn't go into much detail in such a public area. After all, the existence of the celestial realm was a very significant matter. 3 days passed by in a flash, and many more people arrived before the 9th campus of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. In addition to the King Tiers who had participated in the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley, there were also many more cultivators at the Mountain River Tier and Sun Moon Tier. Qualifying to enter the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy wasn't based on cultivation level alone. Rather, the recruitment was based on one's talent, comprehension ability, and physique. It didn't matter if one's cultivation level was low. After all, this was something that could eventually be raised. However, there were some natural characteristics that couldn't be changed, regardless of how high one's cultivation level was. If one wanted to become a saint, cultivation level definitely wasn't the key. Anyhow, the minimum requirement for entering the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy was reaching the pinnacle level in at least one major tier. Thus, there were only around 3,000 or so prospective disciples at this campus. Among them, there were over 2,900 Rank 1 King Tiers. There were far fewer Rank 2 King Tiers, only 300 or so. Meanwhile, there were only a measly 12 Rank 3 King Tiers. Apart from Empress Wenxin, Gu Daoyi, Long Xiangyue, and the 4 others, Ling Han was a newly advanced Rank 3 King Tier. Regarding the 4 others, these were King Tiers who had arrived not long ago. Because of this matter or that matter, these Rank 3 King Tiers hadn't managed to make it in time to participate in the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley. The 9 saints are about to recruit disciples. At this moment, an Eternal River Tier elite walked out from the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy and announced the beginning of the recruitment process. Each person will be called up, and the 9 saints will decide whether or not they want to take you as a disciple. If only one saint shows interest, then you'll be taken as a disciple of that saint. If 2 or more saints show interest, then you can decide which saint you want to become a disciple of. Gu Daoyi. The elite called out the first name. Chapter 1465 The Greatest Prodigy of All Eternity. Chapter 1465 The Greatest Prodigy of All Eternity. The first person to be called up was naturally the prodigy the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy valued the most. Gu Daoyi, the greatest prodigy of all eternity. Everyone gazed at Gu Daoyi with envy. He was publicly acknowledged as the most powerful prodigy. His physique was extraordinary, and he was more so capable of suppressing all other beings. However, it was a shame that he had failed to gain an overwhelming advantage over Empress Luanxing or Ling Han. This left a slight blemish on his name. However, even so, the 9 saints still held him in higher regard, placing his name first. He had received the appreciation of saints. This was an incredible honor. Commotion instantly swept through the crowd of prodigies. In fact, the eyes of many of them went red with jealousy. In reality, Gu Daoyi didn't need to view saints with any respect. After all, he had once been a grand elder at the severing mundane tier. However, after living 10 lives, his personality had also become that of a young person. This was more so the case seeing that he had failed to defeat Ling Han and Empress Luanxing after battling against them so many times. This irritated him greatly. Now that he was called up first, it was as if his name was being redeemed. This made him feel slightly smug and happy. He was brimming with pride as he walked forward. There was a large expanse of empty land before them, and the 9 saints were each seated on a stone lotus around this empty land. These stone lotuses were only 9 meters tall, yet wherever there was a saint, the land around them would become a saintly land. The expanse of empty land was illuminated by a soft divine light, with an intoxicating fragrance wafting from its surface. Fresh and blooming flowers also fluttered down from the sky as if they were celebrating a grand event. "I desire to take him as my disciple," a saint said. "I desire to take him as my disciple," another saint said. "I desire to take him as my disciple. I desire to take him as my disciple." The 9 saints spoke one after another, all of them expressing their desire to take Gu Daoyi as their disciple. The 3,000 or so prodigies were all filled with jealousy when they saw this. These were 9 saints. Yet they had all expressed their desire to take Gu Daoyi as their disciple. This was a profound honor. There was pride and haughtiness in Gu Daoyi's mind. In his eyes, even saints didn't have the right to take him as a disciple. However, he was only at the heavenly body tier right now, so what could he do about this? He had already completed the majority of his preparations in the Medicine King's cave. If he wanted to return to the Genesis tier as soon as possible, he would definitely have to rely on external help and power. The Star Sand Martial Arts Academy was his best choice. His aim was to win the appreciation of the Star Sand Saints so that he could be accepted as his 10th disciple. If that were to occur, he would obtain boundless resources from the Star Sand Saint, and would then have the confidence to become a Saint King in just 1,000 years. At that time, he could tear open a passageway to the celestial realm and return to his homeland. He would then be able to attend to his unfinished business. In this life, he, Gu Daoyi, was going to become a king tier of the celestial realm. He was going to battle for fortune with the true sons and true daughters of those powerful sects. "Gu Daoyi, whom do you wish to take as master?" the Star Sand Saint's 6th disciple, the Peaceful Radiance Saint, asked. Gu Daoyi pondered this for a moment. Right now, he still didn't have the right to directly become a disciple of the Star Sand Saint. It was evident that the Star Sand Saint still needed to observe their character and talents such that he could pick his favorite prodigy out of the 900 disciples. He would then take this prodigy as his direct disciple, and teach them with all of his heart and care. It was a shame that Gu Daoyi couldn't announce that he had once been a grand elder at the Severing Mundane tier. Wouldn't it mean reaching the Genesis tier be mere child's play for him? However, if he truly announced this, how could he be sure that these saints wouldn't try to steal the fruits of his cultivation? He was feeling slightly regretful now. He hadn't killed Ling Han at that time, and he had allowed this hidden danger to grow more powerful. This was all because he had been worked up and convinced by Ling Han's words at that time. In fact, he couldn't have killed Ling Han even if he had wanted to. After all, Ling Han still had the Black Tower. Gu Dao pondered for a moment longer before answering. I want to become a disciple of the Black River Saint. The Black River Saint was the first disciple of the Star Sand Saint. His power was profound, and it was rumored that he might have already become a medium saint. However, Gu Dao clearly hadn't chosen him because of this reason. Rather, it was because he felt that the Black River Saint was just barely worthy of teaching and helping him, being the first disciple of the Star Sand Saint and all. Very well, the Black River Saint said with a nod. He gestured with his hand, and Gu Dao instantly flew before the lotus platform that he was sitting on. There were 900 spots, and one of them had already been taken. Ling Han, the Eternal Riveteer elite from before called. Only in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy would an Eternal Riveteer elite become a mere host of an event. Ling Han was the second prodigy to be called over. The prodigies all wore strange expressions. The competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley had been a battle between the most powerful king tiers, where only one person could ascend the peak. Ling Han had emerged victorious in that competition, with Empress Wanxing helping him hold Gu Dao back. However, in this competition, he had been beaten by Gu Dao. It was clear that the saints held Gu Dao's physique in higher regard. I desire to take him as my disciple. I desire to take him as my disciple. I desire to take him as my disciple. The 9 saints almost all spoke in unison. Although they held Ling Han in slightly lower regard, this was mainly because of his natural physique. However, he was still a piece of rare jade that was worth their effort in carving. This was also the reason why Ling Han was the second king tier to be called over. Of course, he was still inferior to Gu Dao. After all, that was a divine fetus. His future prospects were boundless. In fact, even their master, the Star Sand Saint, had wanted to directly take Gu Dao as his disciple. However, thinking about it carefully, he decided to also give the other prodigies a chance and some encouragement. With this in mind, he suppressed his urge to directly take Gu Dao as his disciple. With the appearance of Gu Dao, the other prodigies were all destined to become dull and lackluster, regardless of how freakishly prodigious they were. The gulf between them was far too large, so large that they didn't even have the right to compete against him. Ling Han, what's your decision? The Black River Saint asked. Ling Han's expression was calm, yet he was actually feeling extremely pissed off. Why was he viewed as inferior to Gu Dao? They had battled against each other twice, and he hadn't been at a disadvantage either time. In fact, there were still many powerful trump cards that he hadn't used yet. If they fought to the death, rising from the ashes would even provide him with 2 extra lifelines. That being the case, how could he not kill Gu Dao? With this in mind, why had he been called up after Gu Dao? Had he lost? In the eyes of these saints, it was evident that one's physique was still more important. Gu Dao possessed a divine fetus. Fine. I'm eager to see your expressions when one day I eventually tread on the face of Gu Dao. Ling Han mulled over his options. In reality, he didn't mind which campus he entered. After all, he had just obtained a large pile of secret techniques. Although these secret techniques couldn't be regarded as paramount when viewed in the context of the celestial realm, each one of them would definitely be profound enough to move the saints of the immortal realm. He swept his gaze over them before answering. I want to become a disciple of the Tranquil Heart Saint. The 9 saints were slightly astonished. Although they were all saints, there were still differences in their power and abilities. Among the 9 saints, the Black River Saint was the most powerful. Moreover, he also specialized in using the sword. Thus, regardless of the situation, Ling Han should have chosen to become a disciple of the Black River Saint, and yet he didn't. Was it because of Gu Dao? However, why had he chosen the Tranquil Heart Saint? Among the 9 saints, the 4th Saint Hardship Alchemy and the 8th Saint Tranquil Heart were slightly more peculiar. They weren't pure cultivators, but rather cultivators who had become saints through alchemy and formations, respectively. Perhaps Ling Han wanted to muck around and learn about formations from the Tranquil Heart Saint? However, becoming a saint through practicing formations was far too difficult. In the past billions of years, only the Tranquil Heart Saint had succeeded in doing so. It was abundantly clear just how difficult this path was. Very well, the Tranquil Heart Saint said. He had indeed become a saint through practicing formations. However, how profoundly powerful were saints? Could he not guide a measly cultivator at the heavenly body tier? He gestured with his hand, and Ling Han instantly flew before the lotus platform that he was sitting on. Empress Wenxin? The Eternal River Tier elite was slightly hesitant as he looked at the list of names before him. This person was actually using a title as their name? Moreover, her title was Empress? He couldn't help but feel displeased. However, the fact that she was ranked 3rd spoke volumes about her talent and abilities, as well as the value that the saints placed on her. Although his cultivation was higher at this moment, the fact that Empress Wenxin had managed to rise above all other prodigies and rank 3rd among them proved that her future prospects were definitely limitless. Only one more saint could appear, but what was to stop her from advancing to the pinnacle level of the Eternal River Tier and becoming a pseudo-saint? Thus, he forcefully suppressed his feeling of displeasure, not allowing it to show on his face. Empress Wenxin gracefully walked over. Although she was breathtakingly beautiful and charming, with the ability to swoon millions upon millions of men, she was actually an incredibly proud and haughty woman. In her eyes, everyone was no more than an insect. Only one person deserved her love and attention. The crowd of prodigies suddenly fell silent, all of them intoxicated by the Empress' charm and beauty. Chapter 1466 Establishing Dominance. Chapter 1466 Establishing Dominance. The Empress was domineering, and her figure was more so mesmerizing and tremendously charming. To say nothing of the young king tiers becoming speechless and intoxicated, even the 9 saints were slightly swayed by her beauty. It was abundantly clear just how captivating the Empress was. I desire to take her as my disciple. I desire to. One after another, the 9 saints all expressed their desire to take her as a disciple. However, before they had even finished speaking, Empress Wenxin had already walked before the lotus platform of the Tranquil Heart Saint, standing beside Ling Han. How could she have chosen otherwise? At this moment, the 9 saints all wore slightly dark expressions. What's with this? We haven't even finished speaking, yet you've already made your decision. Do you still have any respect for US saints? If it had been any other person, they would have definitely been scolded by the saints even if it were Gu Daoi. However, upon seeing Empress Wenxin's breathtaking beauty, none of the saints could steel their hearts to chide her. They felt that her pride was acceptable. After all, who told her to be so beautiful? In any case, she was also a supreme king tier. They would make an exception just this once. Long Xiangyue. The 4th person to be called up was Long Xiangyue. She was a mighty woman, and she appeared much like a true dragon in human form. She would exude a domineering aura wherever she stood. Although she was the 4th person to be called up, this was still a tremendously impressive result. However, there wasn't much joy on her face. In the eyes of the others, being called up 4th was already an incredibly outstanding result. In her eyes, however, this was a humiliating result. Her goal had been 1st place. However, a temporary failure didn't preclude eternal failure. One day, she would definitely defeat those 3 people and become the sole king tier of the younger generation. This was because she was the descendant of a true dragon. Her bloodline was extremely pure, and thus she was destined to become a mighty being who peered down upon all other beings. She chose to become the disciple of the 2nd saint, the Dawn Cloud Saint. This was the only female saint among the 9 saints. She was also a half-human, with the other half of her bloodline coming from the ancient divine beast, the stone origin tortoise. This was the most suitable choice for Long Xiangyue. They were both females, and they both possessed the bloodline of an ancient divine beast. 2nd in the world! Zi Chenfeng! The Supreme King Tiers were called up one after another. They then chose their campus and which saint they would become a disciple of. However, only rank 3 King Tiers had the right to be desired by all 9 of the saints. When it came to the rank 2 King Tiers, apart from the Reign Emperor and the Notionless Saint, the other King Tiers were only desired by a few of the saints. The later one was called up, the less likely they would be desired by the saints. Moreover, after the recruitment of the rank 2 King Tiers, the rank 1 King Tiers could barely raise any interest from the 9 saints. If they were desired by none of the 9 saints, they would be brutally eliminated from the recruitment. However, there were also several rank 1 King Tiers who managed to pique the saints' interest. Although they hadn't been impressive enough to be desired by all of the 9 saints, they had still been able to garner the interest of 3 or 4 of the saints. This was a fairly impressive feat. One of these King Tiers was called Wu Jingfu, a man who had a bright and dazzling moon hovering behind his back. This wasn't a moon that represented the Sun Moon Tier. Rather, this was a moon that represented his rare physique, the bright moon physique. The radiance of this moon could allow one's power to rise explosively. This was an incredibly powerful ability, and it could lead to astonishing results when he was engaged in group battles. Thus, he garnered interest from several saints. In the end, Wu Jingfu chose to become a disciple of the 3rd saint, the Torrential Rain Saint. There was also a person called Lu Kansi, a man whose left arm was surprisingly a spear at birth. Following the advance of his cultivation, the length of this spear would also continue to grow, its power comparable to that of godly metal of the same level. This was also an incredibly rare physique, the weapon physique. Those who possessed this physique would have a weapon as a body part from birth. Lu Kansi became a disciple of the 5th saint, the Iron Saber Saint. This was because the Iron Saber Saint also possessed a weapon physique. As such, he would naturally be his best mentor. The Notionless Saint, Ding Ping, Jiuyao, and the Reign Emperor all received interest from several of the saints. However, among them, only Jiuyao received interest from the Tranquil Heart Saint. Thus, only Jiuyao managed to enter the 8th campus of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. The Reign Emperor, the Notionless Saint, and the others all entered other campuses. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was also quite fortunate. Although her talent wasn't outstanding, she was still accepted by the Dawn Cloud Saint. Perhaps this was because there weren't too many female King Tiers. Half a day passed, and the recruitment of the 900 disciples finally came to an end. Those who hadn't been chosen could only leave in disappointment. It would be another 1,000,000 years before the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy opened up for its next cycle of recruitment. Apart from the disciples of the 9th campus, the other disciples were all led away by their respective saints. The 9 campuses were located all over the various corners of the Woodfigure planet, the distance between each of them relatively large. Even for a heavenly body tier elite, it would take them 10 or so days to travel to the nearest campus. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was especially reluctant to leave Ling Han. She had just discovered the taste of love, and she wanted nothing more than to be entangled with Ling Han all day long. However, she could only choose to bid him farewell now. Anyhow, she could head over to meet Ling Han after they both settled down. Lu Juntian was also present among the disciples. Right now, there was a complicated expression in his eyes as he looked at Ling Han. However, in its depths, there was still a seething killing intent. Among all of the King Tiers, Ling Han's talent had ranked a lofty 2nd. This outcome swayed his conviction significantly. Should he look ahead and forget about seeking revenge on Ling Han? However, the death of his brother was still burning in his mind. He couldn't forget this enmity. That being the case, he would bide his time until he was powerful enough. When the time was ripe, he would strike suddenly and kill Ling Han. Ling Han noticed Lu Juntian's gaze, and killing intent involuntarily rose up in his mind. If he had a chance, he would also kill Lu Juntian. Otherwise, leaving this person alive would only mean trouble. In fact, it wasn't just Lu Juntian who felt animosity toward Ling Han. There was also Nie Tianqing, Shan Jingyi, and even some prodigies who despised him because of his relationship with Empress Luan Xing. Of the people that Ling Han was acquainted with, Faceless passed the recruitment, and became a disciple of the third saint. Yang Lin also passed, becoming a disciple of the seventh saint. However, the Cloud Maiden and Yuing had both been brutally eliminated. They could only leave with hurt and disappointment. Of course, the Stone Emperor and the North Emperor passed the recruitment. Sure enough, they were like two peas in a pod, with both of them becoming a disciple of the Nine Azure Saint. There wasn't much time for them to bid farewell to each other before they all had to set off toward their respective campuses. In any case, they would have heaps of time to catch up with each other in the future. With a wave of his hand, the Tranquil Heart Saint collected his 100 or so disciples. Then, in the blink of an eye, they arrived before the 8th campus. This was a campus that rested on an azure mountain. This was an unfathomably tall mountain, and raising their heads, they could only see thick and swirling mists. A saint naturally wouldn't be tasked with helping them settle in. There was an eternal river tier elite responsible for this, and he led them to a stretch of courtyards. He then tossed them a bunch of tags and said, "Take a tag each. You can unlock the courtyard that corresponds to the number on the tag. This will be your home from now on. Inside your residences, there's also a jade scroll. If you read the information inside this scroll, you'll naturally learn about the rules of the Martial Arts Academy." After saying this, he gracefully took his leave. Eternal River Tier elites were naturally very busy. Just as Ling Han and the others were about to enter the gate to the courtyards, they suddenly saw the gate open by itself. A dozen or people walked out, blocking the entrance to the courtyards. The leader of this group swept his gaze over them before saying with a snicker, "How come all of the new recruits are trash this time? Does trash have the right to enter through the main gate? All of you, crawl in through this dog flap." He pointed to the side of the main gate. Sure enough, there was a dog flap there. Looking at this dog flap, how could the new recruits not know that this was the older disciples trying to establish dominance over them? Moreover, the man who was standing in their path was an Eternal River Tier elite. Chapter 1467 Fighting Back. Chapter 1467 Fighting Back. There was a tradition in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. That was, the senior disciples would establish dominance over the new disciples and take them a notch down. This was because those who could enter this academy were all supreme prodigies. At the very least, they were all king tiers. Which king tier wasn't proud and haughty? Thus, they needed to take these new disciples a few notches down. They needed to make them realize that there were heavens beyond the heavens. Cultivating in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy for 1,000,000 years. What kind of concept was this? Moreover, some of these senior disciples had already cultivated here for more than 1,000,000 years. Perhaps they had been here for 2, 5, or even 10,000,000 years. The man leading them was called Igauning, and he was a disciple who had entered the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy 3,000,000 years ago. At that time, he had also been a young king tier. However, because he had cultivated for several million years less than the older disciples at that time, he had naturally suffered a brutal initiation upon entering. He had advanced to the Eternal River Tier 700,000 years ago, and thus he was naturally brimming with confidence, and feeling as haughty as could be. Moreover, the senior disciples who had bullied him at that time had already left the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Meanwhile, those who hadn't left were all more powerful than him. He wouldn't dare to provoke them. Thus, he turned his attention to these new disciples of the academy. It had already become a tradition to take new disciples down by a notch. Yi Gaoning pointed at the dog flap. This entrance hadn't been dug out recently. Rather, it had already existed for hundreds of millions of years. Each new disciple would be forced to crawl through this dog flap, regardless of whether they were a Supreme King tier or not. Before Eternal River Tier elites, they were as weak as could be. In any case, this dog flap wouldn't be the end of the new disciples' torture. There would still be many more things waiting for them. This was going to be a long and unforgettable day for the new disciples. His Eternal River Tier aura rippled through the surroundings, sinister and mighty. So what if these new disciples were king tiers? They couldn't help but shudder in apprehension. However, there were two exceptions: Ling Han and Empress Luanxing. They were both at the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, meaning that their power had already reached the low extreme of the eternal river tier. Moreover, their battle prowess was on par with those at the late stage or even peak stage of the low extreme. Trying to suppress them with an eternal river tier aura? Perhaps a saintly aura would be more effective. Gao Ning's eyes widened in surprise, and he instantly raised the might of his aura 100-fold. A senior disciple stepped forward, pointing at the new disciples and roaring, "What are you all standing there for? Hurry up and crawl in!" He was slightly weaker than Gao Ning, and he was only at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. By the looks of it, he couldn't reach the pinnacle level either. Otherwise, he would be a rank 3 king tier. However, before this recruitment cycle, even the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy hadn't been able to recruit a single rank 3 king tier. To say nothing of rank 3 king tiers, even rank 2 king tiers were pitifully rare. Thus, this person was most likely a rank 1 king tier. Moreover, he had probably become a rank 1 king tier through reaching the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. "Hurry up! Or perhaps you want senior brother E to use force?" another person shouted. In the past, these people had all crawled through the dog flap and been tortured by their seniors. Thus, they were naturally burning to take their anger out on someone. When the new disciples arrived, they could naturally unleash all of their negative emotions and bad memories on the new generation of disciples. "Why?" one of the new disciples asked in indignance. "This is the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Do you people dare to make trouble? What a joke! Since you know this is a martial arts academy, you should also know that might is right," one of the seniors said with a sneer. "If you don't want to be beaten daily, then obediently crawl through this dog flap. Otherwise, what awaits you is a fate far crueler than this. Forget about it. Let me tell you a story." He started to tell the new disciples a story. Indeed, not every new disciple would yield to the older disciples and obediently crawl through the dog flap. Some of them would resist, yet these people would all be suppressed. They would then be forced to comply. There were also some who chose to flee from the older disciples and seek help from the teachers of the academy. However, this would be useless. There was no shortage of eternal river tier elites among the disciples, with some of them even at the high extreme or consummate level. Thus, what could the teachers do about them? These older disciples could choose to ignore them. As such, seeking help would lead to an even crueler fate. Those who sought help would be stripped naked, and then forced to crawl through the dog flap. This was even more humiliating. However, this was their only option if they wanted to be let free. This was tradition, and no one could be exempt. Even the mighty higher-ups of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy had suffered this brutal initiation when they had first entered the academy. After hearing these stories, the resolve of the young king tiers started to waver. They had heard a few well-renowned names. These were mighty figures who were rumored to be at least at the high extreme of the eternal river tier. However, even they had suffered this fate upon entering the academy. They had also been forced to crawl through this dog flap. Now, however, they were all mighty and paramount. They were the most powerful disciples whom even the teachers didn't dare to provoke. "I guess I'll crawl in. This is tradition, after all." The king tiers all lowered their proud and noble heads, crawling through the dog flap one after another. However, this wasn't the end. Rather, this was just the beginning of an entertaining show. Since the new disciples had already bowed their heads and abandoned their dignity, their resistance would only become weaker and weaker as time passed. Smiles stretched across the faces of the older disciples, and they chuckled in delight as they pointed at the new disciples. Meanwhile, some of them wore expressions of recollection. It was as if they could see a shadow of themselves on the bodies of these new disciples. However, they had finally pushed through that torturous period. Now, it was they who were suppressing the new disciples. There were only 100 new disciples, so even if their movements were slow, how long would it take for all of them to crawl through the dog flap? Why are you three still standing there?" a senior disciple asked as he glared at Ling Han and the others. The other king tiers were all lining up before the dog flap, with 7 or 8 of them still yet to crawl through. However, these 3 new disciples remained standing where they were, calm and composed as if this had nothing to do with them. It was as if they were watching a show. "What else should we be doing?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Come over here and line up. Then crawl through the dog flap," the senior disciple replied. "You don't even know how to crawl through a dog flap?" another senior disciple asked with a cold sneer. They all felt a rush of excitement upon seeing the King Tears being humiliated. Perhaps this was also one of the reasons why this tradition hadn't been abandoned even after so many years. "I genuinely don't. Why don't you people demonstrate it for me? After all, I'm sure you all have a lot of experience," Ling Han replied with a casual smile. There wasn't a hint of anger on his face. Gasp! However, his words managed to enrage all of the senior disciples. He was clearly opening up old wounds. The older disciples had all been mentally scarred by this, and it was only through becoming the oppressors themselves that they could wash away their humiliation. Regardless, their experiences were still a torturous stain in their memory. Yet, Ling Han had actually dared to mention this. He was asking for a beating. A senior disciple stepped forward, saying, "There are always some difficult disciples. By the looks of it, it's you 3 this time." He swept his gaze over them. However, his gaze suddenly stopped when it arrived at Empress Wenxin. His jaw involuntarily dropped, and there was a stunned expression on his face. Her demeanor was far too intoxicating. Even though he hadn't witnessed her appearance, his heart was already starting to race. It was beating so fast that it seemed like it were about to jump out from his chest. "Master, I'll deal with them," Jiuyao said as he stepped forward. During the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley, he hadn't had the chance to battle against the other powerful elites. Thus, he was itching to fight at this moment. Ling Han pondered for a moment before nodding and replying, "Go ahead." After receiving the benefits from the Sunstone, Jiuyao had already advanced to the middle stage of the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. Meanwhile, the senior disciple before them was also only at the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. Even though he was at the peak stage, Ling Han was confident that Jiuyao wouldn't be at a disadvantage. "Come battle!" Jiuyao was burning with fighting spirit. He wanted to see just how powerful the disciples of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy were. "Junior brother, this senior brother will give you some guidance today. Even if we're both King Tears, I'll show you just how large the gulf between us can be." His body shuddered, and a black mist started to flow out from beneath his feet. This black mist then enveloped both him and Jiuyao. This was one of his ultimate techniques. This black mist could obstruct his opponent's vision and senses, thereby reducing their battle prowess by at least 50 to 60%. 1. A brilliant light suddenly exploded from within the black mist. This light was like the sun, and it instantly dispersed the thick cloud of black mist. Chapter 1468 Troublemakers. Chapter 1468 Troublemakers. Sun Physique. Ling Han had ascended the gigantic golden boulder above the Sunken Abyss Valley and obtained the greatest opportunity. However, his success had also allowed the others to obtain more benefits. With the blessing of heaven and earth lasting for so long, those who had reached the second stage had all absorbed some of the essence of the Sunstone. This had allowed their cultivation to advance, and had even allowed them to obtain the Sun Physique. Of course, these were far inferior to the great accomplishment stage Sun Physique that Ling Han had obtained. However, this was only the immortal realm, and thus even an iota of power from the celestial realm was already more than impressive enough. Jiuyao was as radiant as the sun as he dispersed the black mist. "What?" the 12 or so senior disciples exclaimed in astonishment. "What cultivation technique is this? It's actually capable of dispersing Junior Brother Chu's extreme night dark mist? Why do I feel like I can't even open my eyes?" someone asked, their expression changing drastically. "My divine sense can't detect any movement inside that light," someone exclaimed in shock. The extreme night dark mist was the ultimate technique of the 8th campus. Moreover, because the tranquil heart saint had succeeded his Tao through formations, this ultimate technique naturally made use of formations as well. However, one didn't need to use formation eyes for this formation. Instead, they would act as the formation eye themselves. The integration of humans in formations was incredibly mighty. This wasn't something that cultivators at the same cultivation level could defeat. So, why had it been ineffective? Jiuyao charged forward, launching a wild and ferocious punch. This was slightly risky. Unless one possessed a physique as freakish as Ling Han's, one generally wouldn't be willing to draw too close to their opponents. This was because doing so would increase their own chance of being struck as well. Moreover, this would be especially dangerous if their opponent possessed a god tool. If they were struck by a god tool, allowing its murderous aura to enter their body, they would definitely suffer severe damage. However, the situation right now was different. That senior disciple was blinded by the dazzling radiance of the sun physique, and all that he could see was a blurry sheet of white. His divine sense had also been disturbed. In other words, he was as good as blind. It was because of this that Jiuyao dared to charge forward. The senior disciple was astonished. However, his battle instincts caused him to immediately leap backward in an attempt to escape the area that was affected by Jiuyao's sunlight. This was a very sound response. However, Jiuyao continued to advance as the other retreated, maintaining the short distance between them. One of them was retreating, while one of them was advancing. However, both were incredibly quick. The senior disciple became more and more shocked. Regardless of how he retreated, his surroundings would always be flooded with a blinding light. He couldn't see anything. This caused terror to rise in his mind. This won't last forever, right? Boom! The rising panic in his mind naturally caused him to make a slip-up. His retreat suddenly became slower, and Jiuyao's fist immediately arrived before his body. Pa! He was instantly sent flying. However, at the same time, he also exited the area that was enveloped by the blinding light. He crashed into the ground with a loud thud. There was a slightly salty taste in his mouth, and opening it, he immediately spat out 3 broken and bloody teeth. Jiuyao retracted his sun physique, a satisfied smile on his face. He hadn't activated the power of his bloodline. Instead, he had only activated his newly obtained physique. Even so, he had managed to defeat a fellow king tier at the same cultivation level with ease. The Sun Stone was a precious stone from the celestial realm, and it was a stone that had nurtured and given birth to the 9 heavens flame, an ancestral flame. Thus, even if Jiuyao had only received a tiny fraction of benefits from it, this was still incredibly freakish when viewed in the context of the immortal realm. The other senior disciples were all stunned. Meanwhile, the young king tiers who still had yet to crawl through the dog flaps stood up, complicated expressions on their faces as they gazed at Ling Han, Empress Luanxing, and Jiuyao. These were people who dared to resist and fight back. Although they were destined to lose, just their willpower alone was already worthy of their respect and admiration. Humph! Sure enough, you people are troublemakers, Yi Gaoning said with a baleful expression. You might be strong, but this is completely useless. In fact, it will only cause you to suffer more. Jiuyao wagged his finger in disagreement, saying, Is there anyone else? For those at the same cultivation level, I'll fight against however many of you step forward. In fact, I'll even fight against those at the medium extreme or high extreme. Right now, he possessed 2 different physiques, both of them extremely powerful. This caused his confidence to rise significantly. So intimidating was his domineering aura that none of the senior disciples dared to step forward and accept his challenge. Humph! You're a measly cultivator at the heavenly body tier. I can suppress you with a single finger. Yi Gaoning looked at him in disdain, saying, Don't forget, this isn't a sparring session. Rather, we're here to give you a welcome ceremony. Since you're resisting, we'll beat you down first. He raised a hand and grabbed at Jiuyao. As his hand reached forward, it transformed into a dry and shrunken claw. It was unclear what species this claw was from, but it reflected an icy cold and metallic sheen. It was as if this claw were forged from godly metal. It was extremely terrifying. Even more terrifying than this was his eternal river tear aura. He didn't need to fully unleash it, and just a wisp of its might would be powerful enough to suppress all of the beings present. Jiuyao wouldn't be able to resist this might even if he were 10,000 times more powerful. Empress Wanxing wanted to help, yet Ling Han raised his left arm to prevent her from interfering. He then extended his right arm, grabbing at that powerful claw. Laughable! Yi Gaoning said with a cold sneer. He was at the eternal river tier. He had only advanced to the eternal river tier 700,000 years ago, and right now, he was only at the late stage of the low extreme. However, those at the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier would only possess power that was on par with the early stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier. Moreover, was he not a prodigy? He would have an advantage of 2 stars, and he was more so a 5-star genius himself. Thus, with these combined, he would possess a crushing advantage of a whopping 7 stars. If he still couldn't defeat Ling Han, then he might as well kill himself. Ling Han casually waved his hand, and Yi Gaoning's claw immediately eroded at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. His claw was like sand that was flying away with the wind. Before his claw could even reach Ling Han, it had already vanished into nothingness. The Tide of the Ages. Ling Han had obtained the complete cultivation technique, Song of the Ages, from Huiyu. This wasn't like the cultivation technique that he had extracted from Ding Zizhen's bloodline memory. Those in the Ding clan would all receive the inheritance, the Tide of the Ages, in their bloodline. However, some would be powerful, while others would be weak. This was completely dependent on their bloodline. Thus, Ling Han's grasp of the Tide of the Ages would be affected by the limit of Ding Zizhen's bloodline. Regardless of how powerful he became, his grasp of this technique wouldn't be able to surpass Ding Zizhen's. At the very least, he would need to advance to the severing mundane tier before he could investigate the power of time. However, Ling Han had cultivated in seclusion for 10 years after obtaining Song of the Ages. As such, how could his grasp of this technique not have improved? What? Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. In fact, even Yi Gaoning was astonished. How is this possible? This didn't make sense. As a king tier at the late stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier, shouldn't he have possessed a crushing advantage over someone at the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier? Meanwhile, the 7 king tiers who had yet to crawl through the dog flap all exclaimed in emotion. No wonder Ling Han was able to rank second among all of the new disciples. This was true strength. In fact, they even started to doubt whether Gu Dao would be powerful enough to achieve such a feat were he to be in Ling Han's position. Ling Han retracted his hand, and calmly said, "My disciple doesn't need your guidance. If he needs any guidance, I'll naturally provide it to him." Yi Gaoning's expression was slightly adrift. He was pondering whether he should battle against Ling Han. However, would he still have the face to show himself in the future if he retreated from a new disciple? Taking new disciples down a notch was tradition. If he failed to complete this task, it was very likely that the supremely powerful king tiers of the academy wouldn't let him off lightly. He couldn't help but curse in his mind. Why had he come across such a freak? Among the 9 saints, the Tranquil Heart Saint wasn't famous for his raw battle prowess. Instead, he was famous for his skill in the field of formations. In past years, no Supreme King tier had become a disciple of the 8th campus. It was also because of this that he was extremely relaxed and wanton. However, who knew that he would be so unfortunate? Such was his luck that he had come across this terrifying Supreme King tier. Motherfucker! Is there something wrong with your brain? Why did you come to the 8th campus? You're screwing me over, do you know that? Yi Gaoning didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han. Junior brother, what's your name? He asked in a solemn voice. Ling Han. Ling Han replied calmly. Shall we spar? Yi Gaoning didn't dare to make any more bold claims. After all, he genuinely wasn't confident of winning against Ling Han. The power of his opponent was beyond his expectations. If he knew that Ling Han had been called up second by the saints, perhaps he would feel slightly more at ease. Chapter 1469 Unable to achieve victory. Chapter 1469 Unable to Achieve Victory. Spar? Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle. He shook his head and said, "If it's genuine sparring, I welcome it at any time. However, it's a shame that you people aren't here to simply spar. It's clear that you're trying to exert dominance and take us down a notch. Let us battle. Enough with the nonsense. If you're unable to achieve victory against me, then please go and obediently crawl through that dog flap as well." Anger involuntarily flared across Yi Gaoning's face. Ling Han wanted him to crawl through the dog flap. He was an eternal River-tier elite. Even on Woodfigure Planet, where there were 10 saints, eternal River-tier cultivators could still be regarded as elites. These were powerful cultivators who commanded respect and reverence from everyone. Yet Ling Han actually wanted an eternal River-tier elite to crawl through a dog flap. Was he trying to cause an uprising? I've seen many audacious people. However, Yi Gaoning shook his head and continued, "Junior brother Ling, your talent is indeed incredible. However, you have to understand that this is the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Here, there is no shortage of prodigies." Ling Han laughed loudly, appearing as wanton as could be. "That's because you've never come across me before." He was radiating with pride as he said this, and his astonishing aura was so powerful that it could convince all those who heard his words. Yi Gaoning was also affected by his aura. He faltered momentarily before a dark expression spread across his face. "Then let us battle." There was regret in his mind. Why had he accepted this task? If he had known that there would be such a powerful troublemaker, would he still have fought so hard for this task? What could he do now? Not only had he come across a troublemaker, but this troublemaker was even a profoundly powerful freak. Destruction of 1,000 Dao. He slapped his own body. Wang! Specks of incredibly bright light pulsated inside his body. This was a formation eye. The Tranquil Heart Saint had succeeded his Dao through formations, and he had more so achieved this by using his own body as a formation. Every single bone in his body was a formation eye, and his body itself was more so a large killing formation. Numerous golden sabers materialized around Yi Gaoning, all of them brimming with a murderous aura that soared into the skies. Upon seeing this, a speculation formed in Ling Han's mind. Back in the lower realm, Ma Duo Bao had been born as a killing formation. The first killing formation had been engraved inside his body. Moreover, the third killing formation had also been a person. Perhaps this wasn't the doing of the heavens, but instead a bloodline inheritance as well? For example, if Yi Gaoning was powerful enough, the formation patterns engraved on his bones could be passed down onto his descendants. Of course, this inheritance naturally wouldn't be a complete inheritance. However, just a portion of its power would be sufficiently powerful enough to be regarded as the first killing formation or third killing formation if it were placed in a small world. Ling Han already knew that bloodlines were created when a powerful ancestor fused their Dao into their body. It was because of this that their bloodline could be passed down through future generations. That being the case, why couldn't formations be passed down? 1. Just as his thoughts were running wild, Yi Gaoning had already lashed out. Several hundred golden sabers shot toward Ling Han. Ling Han forcefully charged toward them, not trying to evade at all. "Are you seeking death?" Yi Gaoning couldn't help but sneer. He conceded that Ling Han's technique just then had indeed been astonishing. Ling Han had blocked his attack using a technique that even he couldn't understand. However, he had only launched a casual attack just then. Now, however, he was attacking with his full power. Yet Ling Han was still charging over without a care in the world? Was he seeking death? "I'll grant you your wish." Gaoning circulated his formation and fused it together with his battle prowess. He then pushed his attack to the extreme as the sabers blasted toward Ling Han. He naturally wouldn't kill this new disciple. Taking them down a notch was just that, but if he killed a new disciple, he would definitely have to pay with his own life. No one would be exempt from this punishment. However, it was unavoidable that Ling Han would suffer shattered bones and other severe wounds. The golden sabers arrived before Ling Han. Ding, ding, ding! There was a series of crisp rings, and it was as if these were real god tools, not weapons that had been formed from origin power and spiritual chi. However, what did this matter? The golden sabers were all deflected aside as they struck Ling Han's body. It was as if he weren't being attacked by an eternal riveter elite, but instead by some random weakling. How is this possible? Yi Gaoning was unable to accept this. What kind of fucking defensive armor are you wearing? How is it so freakish? It can easily withstand my full power attack? However, he could clearly see that there was no glowing divine pattern on Ling Han's body. If he were using a god tool, there was no way that it could be so subtle. Perhaps it's his physique? Gasp. Indeed, Ling Han's physique had already surpassed the toughness of level 13 godly metal. However, just this alone still wouldn't be enough to withstand the attack of a king tier at the low extreme of the eternal river tier. More importantly, Ling Han had actively channeled the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. This had allowed his defenses to reach an astonishing level for a short period of time. In fact, he could have even withstood the attack of a saint. That being the case, how could Yi Gaoning's attack have wounded him? After launching his most powerful attack, his defenses were naturally at their most fragile state. Pun! Ling Han launched a punch that smashed into Yi Gaoning's face. Yi Gaoning was instantly sent flying. He crashed into a gate before bouncing back off, his arms and legs spread wide open as he collapsed onto the ground. Everyone grimaced upon seeing this. Were these new disciples trying to defy the heavens? Was Yi Gaoning powerful? He was undoubtedly powerful. However, Ling Han had defeated him in a single strike. In fact, if Yi Gaoning had been prepared, he could have engaged in a long skirmish with Ling Han. That way, even if Ling Han had eventually won, it would have taken him at least several hundred, several thousand, or even tens of thousands of exchanges. However, how could Yi Gaoning have known that Ling Han possessed such a freakish physique? After a single violent exchange, he was instantly sent sprawling. Brilliant! The 7 new disciples couldn't help but exclaim in delight. They naturally didn't want to crawl through the dog flap. They were king tiers, so how could they be willing to suffer such humiliation? Thus, they were all exhilarated upon seeing Ling Han resist and fight back, even gaining an upper hand. After witnessing this, they could accept it even if a more powerful senior disciple eventually appeared and forced them to crawl through the dog flap. They had fought back. And they had even slapped the face of a senior disciple. Yi Gaoning slowly picked himself up. In the instant that Ling Han had struck him, he had used his origin power to guard his own face. Thus, even though he had been sent flying, he hadn't suffered any severe wounds. After all, he was an elite at the late stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier. Moreover, he was also a king tier. His face was beet red as he glowered at Ling Han. He had actually lost to a new disciple. There were more so flames of rage and menace flickering in his eyes. He had been slapped before so many people. How utterly humiliating! If he didn't exact revenge, how could he face anyone in the future? Just you wait! However, Yi Gaoning didn't choose to continue his battle with Ling Han. He was afraid that he would be humiliated even further. He was going to seek help from more powerful seniors and ask them to suppress Ling Han. Rules were rules. To say nothing of Ling Han, even the current saints had been forced to crawl through these dog flaps when they had first arrived at the academy. Ling Han would be dreaming if he wanted to become the first exception. Doing so would be opposing the entire Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. He was destined to fail. Humph! Trying to leave? Ling Han said with a cold chuckle. What a joke, you tried to force me into crawling through this dog flap even though I didn't provoke you in any way. Yet, after being defeated by me, you're trying to pat yourself off and leave? Do you think it's that easy? Perhaps you want me to stay? Yi Gaoning asked. He couldn't help but chuckle. I don't want you to stay, I'll force you to stay. Killing intent radiated from Ling Han's body. I already said it just then. If you lose to me, then please go and obediently crawl through that dog flap. In your dreams, Yi Gaoning said with a cold chuckle. Looking back at history, there had never been a shortage of troublemakers. Among them, There had also been some supremely talented individuals. However, in the end, which of them hadn't been suppressed by a more powerful senior? There was no helping this. The gulf between their cultivation levels was far too large, so how could they withstand the might of their seniors? If a king tier at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier couldn't suppress Ling Han, then what about a king tier at the medium extreme? Or the high extreme? Or perhaps even the consummate level? Chapter 1470 Great Misfortune. Chapter 1470 Great Misfortune. Yi Gaoning decided to ignore Ling Han. He didn't have any confidence in going against him, so it was definitely best to seek out some reinforcements. He turned around to leave. However, just as he raised his foot, he felt a terrifying killing intent lock onto him. This killing intent would mercilessly slash over if he dared to take a step, killing and leaving him with no proper burial. This was only a feeling. However, elites like him held immense trust in their senses and intuition. If he took a step, he would trigger a wild and unrelenting barrage of attacks from Ling Han. However, Yi Gaoning found this a little strange. This was because there was something slightly different about this killing intent. He turned around extremely slowly, afraid that any quick movements would cause his opponent to mercilessly attack. When he finally managed to fully turn around, Yi Gaoning was astonished to discover that the killing intent that had locked onto him wasn't from Ling Han. Rather, it was from the woman who had a white veil covering her face. Her figure was stunning, and she radiated with an aura of nobility and dominance. It was as if she were an empress. Yi Gaoning was completely stunned. This killing intent was terrifying, so much so that even he was feeling apprehensive. From this, it could be seen that this woman definitely possessed a devastating power. However, this woman was only at the heavenly body tier. This was another Supreme King tier at the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. Otherwise, there was no way she could have exuded such an overwhelming and terrifying aura. Yi Gaoning was about to go crazy. This was the fucking 8th campus, where everyone specialized in practicing formations. So, why had two Supreme King tiers decided to come here? There was a menacing glint in Empress Wenxin's eyes. This person actually wanted her and Ling Han to crawl through the dog flap. With her proud and haughty personality, how could she not be enraged? "I'm going to dice you into 10,000 pieces and feed you to the wild dogs," the Empress said in rage. However, her charm was far too great. Even though she had uttered such a menacing threat, not a single person felt hostility toward her. Instead, they felt that she was extremely domineering. "Young lady, I don't eat meat," the large black dog said as he suddenly appeared from out of nowhere. "Don't slander Grandpa Dog." Ling Han chuckled upon hearing this. This depraved dog didn't eat meat? Who the fuck would believe this? If he came across a supremely valuable medicine, perhaps he would be vegetarian for that short period of time. However, during other times, he would definitely be a dog who didn't care what he ingested, whether it was meat or otherwise. Regarding the large black dog mysteriously appearing and disappearing, Ling Han didn't find this especially strange. "Either crawl through the dog flap or get pummeled by me. It's your choice." Ling Han rolled up his sleeves, and it was as if he were going to team up with Empress Wenxin to punish Yi Gaoning. "Dog? Dog flap?" the large black dog asked as he jumped over. Upon seeing the dog flap beside the gate, he couldn't help but feel enraged, shouting, "You brats actually dare to insult me? Grandpa Dog is going to bite you people to death!" He dashed over and ferociously bit at Yi Gaoning's bottom. The pitiful Yi Gaoning didn't dare to move at all. Ling Han and Empress Wenxin had already locked onto his aura, so if he dared to move, he would definitely have to face devastating attacks from them. He didn't dare to take this risk. In his mind, there was nothing special about this large black dog. It was just slightly strange in that it was actually wearing a pair of iron underwear. This dog was nothing but a joke. Thus, he simply channeled his origin power, forming a protective barrier around his body. Ling Han sighed upon seeing this. Although the large black dog was extremely depraved, those who dared to underestimate him would all face misfortune, great misfortune. 1. The large black dog mysteriously broke through Yi Gaoning's protective barrier. With a snarl, he then viciously bit down on Yi Gaoning's bottom. Ah! Yi Gaoning's entire body arched back as severe pain shot through his body. He had no time to worry about his movements being too large and thereby triggering attacks from Ling Han and Empress Luan Xing, either. Through howls of agony, he hurriedly moved his hands down to protect his bottom. You actually dared to insult me? See how I bite your bottom into 3 cheeks. The large black dog continued to ferociously bite at Yi Gaoning's bottom. There were loud tearing sounds, and blood started to flow from his mouth. Let go! Hurry up and let go! Yi Gaoning shouted through gritted teeth. There were no bones in one's bottom, so this brutal bite truly sent waves of heart-wrenching pain through his body. Yi Gaoning genuinely couldn't endure this any longer, so he stood up and started to run, hoping to shake the large black dog off. However, the large black dog was extremely tenacious when it came to things like this. He wouldn't let go no matter what, and it was as if he were determined to bite a piece of Yi Gaoning's flesh off. Moreover, he continued to add insult to the injury, saying, Ugly man, why is your bottom so stinky? How many days haven't you bathed for? Pay. It's Grandpa Dog's great misfortune to have come across a sh*tty person such as you. Yi Gaoning almost vomited blood upon hearing this. It was him who was suffering great misfortune, okay? His bottom was actually being bitten by a rabid dog. Everyone was stunned speechless by this incredibly strange sight. An eternal riveter elite was actually having his bottom bitten by a large black dog. And this large black dog was actually wearing a pair of iron underwear? This sight was as strange as could be. C*nt dog, I'm going to kill you! Yi Gaoning couldn't shake the large black dog off, so he had no choice but to attack. His bones started to glow. In fact, there were formation patterns inscribed on his bones, meaning that each of his bones was a formation eye in itself. Moreover, the higher his cultivation level, the higher the level of formation patterns that he could inscribe on his bones. The higher the level of these formation patterns, the more mighty they would naturally be. Countless golden sabers slashed toward the large black dog, yearning to dice him into mincemeat. However, the large black dog's physique was surprisingly powerful, with the golden sabers unable to hurt him a single bit. In fact, they couldn't even cut off a single strand of his hair. The large black dog was extremely smug as he continued to bite onto Yi Gaoning's bottom. Surprisingly, however, he still had the ability to speak, saying, Trying to hurt your grandpa dog? You're far too weak. Foolish human, obediently become my stead. Yi Gaoning was beside himself with rage. He could accept defeat, but asking him to become the stead of this large black dog. If he truly became one, he would genuinely have no more face in the future. Fuck this, I'm going to kill you! He roared. He angrily gritted his teeth, causing a mouthful of blood to shoot out from his mouth. At the same time, 30% of his hair instantly turned grayish-white. However, his aura rose explosively, reaching the medium extreme of the eternal riveter. Pun! He launched a palm, striking at the large black dog's body. The might of this strike was far too great, and the large black dog was instantly sent flying. However, there was a loud tearing sound as a large chunk of Yi Gaoning's bottom was brutally torn off. There was a massive hole in his pants, and his white bottom was clear for the world to see. However, there was a large chunk of it missing. Blood flowed freely, dyeing his pants a crimson red. Because there was a large chunk of flesh missing from his left bum cheek, it now looked like it was 2 cheeks. Add to that his right bum cheek, and sure enough, he now had 3 bum cheeks just as the large black dog had promised. However, it was the large black dog who started unleash deafening screams of agony. Murder! Murder! The pain is killing Grandpa Dog! Hurry, someone come and help me! There's a man and indiscriminately beating people. Everyone grimaced upon seeing this. In fact, even Ling Han started to feel some slight sympathy for Yi Gaoning. There wasn't a single wound on the large black dog's body, while Yi Gaoning had suffered a devastating wound to his bottom. Was it not clear who had suffered more? However, this despicable dog was actually screaming before Gowning even opened his mouth. Moreover, his screams were deafening and earth-shattering. If they hadn't witnessed the events with their very own eyes, they would have definitely thought that Gowning had done something unspeakable to the despicable large black dog. This caused Gowning to forget his pain. He was dazed as he stared at the large black dog, and he felt that of the countless shameless people that he had come across in his lifetime, none of them could even come close to comparing to this large black dog. They were like his grandsons when it came to shamelessness. Some cleverer senior disciple had already turned around to flee. Since Gowning wasn't able to break free, it was probably best that he run away to call for reinforcements. There were freakish talents among the new disciples, and there was also a despicable yet powerful large black dog. However, before he could even leave, he saw a large hand descending from the sky, forcefully suppressing him. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "I can allow you to leave, but through this door, please." He pointed at the dog flap. Since this was how they had treated him, he was simply returning the favor now. Chapter 1471 Petrified. Chapter 1471 Petrified. No! The senior disciples all tilted their heads in defiance. How could they do this? They were the senior disciples. Not only had they failed to uphold the tradition, but they were even being bullied by their junior disciples now. How could they accept this? "I'm not asking for your opinions," Ling Han said as he lashed out. "Pa, pa, pa." He mercilessly broke their legs before forcing them to crawl through the dog flap. When the first person crawled through, there was initially silence from behind the gates. However, shouts of delight quickly broke out. "Senior Brother Ling! Senior Brother Ling! Senior Brother Ling!" Everyone was shouting Ling Han's name, excitement and exhilaration in their voices. Which of them wasn't a king tier? Had they ever suffered such humiliation before? However, they were weaker than the senior disciples, so what could they do? Just a single eternal river tier elite was enough to suppress them all. Moreover, their backgrounds would be of no help either. After all, the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy had 10 saints. However, in the blink of an eye, those haughty senior disciples were given a taste of their own medicine. They were forced to get down on all fours and crawl through the dog flap just like they had. This naturally tugged at their emotions and caused them to become incredibly excited and worked up. At this moment, they were willing to wade through fire and water for Ling Han. Meanwhile, the senior disciples who were crawling through the dog flap were all beet red in the face. They were feeling incredibly stifled. However, who told them to provoke the new disciples first? They naturally had to face the consequences of their own inflammatory actions. "It's your turn," Ling Han said as he looked at Gowning. Gowning gritted his teeth. He definitely couldn't kneel. It didn't matter as much for the other senior disciples, as they were only at the heavenly body tier. Thus, it wasn't overly humiliating that they had lost against someone at the same cultivation level. However, he was different. He was an eternal river tier elite, and he represented the face of the older disciples. If he crawled through the dog flap, that would be equivalent to all of the senior disciples being slapped across the face. He definitely couldn't shoulder such a responsibility. If he kneeled, he would become the eternal shame of the senior disciples. No! Gowning was burning with fighting spirit. In order to break free from the large black dog just then, he had combusted his life force. Thus, he was brimming with energy right now, searing hot energy. "You actually forced me to this extent. I'm going to make you pay," he roared. Combusting his life force meant that his cultivation wouldn't see any improvements for the next several million years, unless he obtained some saint-level natural treasures. He had genuinely suffered a massive loss. He aggressively lashed out, aiming to suppress both Ling Han and Empress Luanxing. At the very least, he had to win back some face. "Wife, let's beat him together," Ling Han said with a smile. "Sure," the Empress replied with a gentle nod. Generally speaking, Supreme King tiers like them would find it beneath themselves to team up with others and gang up on someone. However, who told Gowning to be at the Eternal River tier? To say nothing of them two teaming up, it wouldn't raise an eyebrow even if 100 people teamed up. After all, could a team of 100 heavenly body tier elites erase the gulf in power between them and an eternal river tier elite? No way. Ling Han unleashed heaven's might. It didn't matter that Yi Gaoning was at the eternal river tier, with his power still being suppressed by 2 stars. After advancing to the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, Ling Han could now be considered as a pseudo-eternal Rive tier elite. Thus, Yi Gaoning would naturally be affected by heaven's might. Meanwhile, Empress Wenxin swung a brick at Yi Gaoning. This was the absolute beginning stone, and it was a brick that could absorb all power as long as the said power wasn't at the Genesis tier. Quite simply, this was an invincible brick. Pa pa pa! The combined power of Ling Han and Empress Wenxin was incredible. What did it matter that Yi Gaoning had combusted his life force and advanced to the medium extreme of the eternal river tier for the time being? His power had been suppressed by 2 stars, and his attacks were more so dissolved by the tide of the ages. For those attacks that Ling Han and Empress Wenxin couldn't block, wasn't there still the absolute beginning stone? In terms of cultivation, Yi Gaoning was a king tier who possessed a tremendous advantage over his opponents. However, he was actually struggling to contain 2 heavenly body tier cultivators. In fact, he was actually being suppressed by them instead. The surrounding disciples could barely believe their eyes. It was as if they were in a dream. These new disciples weren't just impressive. Rather, they were boundlessly impressive. Ling Han and Empress Wenxin were flawless in their cooperation. They unleashed all kinds of powerful techniques, quickly translating their advantage into victory. They had successfully defeated and captured Yi Gaoning. "Are you sure you don't want to crawl through the dog flap?" Ling Han asked. Yi Gaoning kept his mouth tightly shut. He definitely wouldn't bow his head. At this moment, he wasn't representing just himself. "Little Black, come!" Ling Han said with a wave of his hand. "Who's calling Grandpa Dog?" the large black dog asked as he appeared from out of nowhere again. He slowly ran over, and upon discovering that it was Ling Han, he stood up on his hind legs like a human. He clasped his front paws behind his back and said, "Brat, how audacious of you! You actually dared to call Grandpa Dog Little Black? Then Big Black?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "It's Grandpa Black," the large black dog corrected. He then waved his paw and said, "Brat, why did you call Grandpa Dog? Think of a way to force him through the dog FL." The large black dog cut Ling Han off and shouted in displeasure, "Dog your mom! That's a rat hole!" Ling Han was unfazed, and he continued, "Think of a way to make him crawl through." The large black dog was full of evil tricks, and he greatly enjoyed screwing other people over. There was a glimmer in his eyes, and he said, "Grandpa Dog is great at these things." Judging by his excited expression, Ling Han's request had definitely piqued his interest. In fact, even his tongue was hanging out of his mouth, with drool freely flowing down. A cold chill shot down Yi Gaoning's spine. He genuinely wasn't afraid of Ling Han. After all, Ling Han wouldn't dare to kill him, was certain of this. Moreover, in just a while, many more senior disciples would naturally arrive to check on the situation. At that time, his crisis would have been eliminated. However, this large black dog was far too depraved. Heavens knew what kind of debauched method he would use. Just thinking about this made him tremble uncontrollably. An eternal river tier elite was trembling after hearing his words. A large black dog could feel very proud of this. "Huh! Why are you trembling? Are you afraid of Grandpa Dog? You truly hurt Grandpa Dog's heart. Grandpa Dog is so kind-hearted that I won't even kill an ant. If anyone calls Grandpa Dog a bad person, then there definitely exists no good person in the world." The large black dog spoke with great emotion. However, Ling Han uncovered him from the side, saying, "Of course you're not a bad person. After all, you're a dog. Woof! Believe me, I'll bite you to death as well," the large black dog threatened. Ling Han shrugged and said, "Hurry up and give me an idea. Pay. If it weren't for you continually interrupting me, this brat would have been shaking in submission already." The large black dog's eyes darted around, and he said to Yigao, "If you don't obey, Grandpa Dog will find a sow and then feed you some medicine. I'll have you mate with the sow right here in front of everyone." "Pooh!" Ling Han instantly coughed and spluttered. Sure enough, this large black dog was an incredibly depraved dog. He was far too malicious. He could even concoct such a debauched idea. Yigao was drenched in cold sweat. If he genuinely mated with a sow, would he still have the face to remain in the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy? Whenever others saw him, they would, warmly, refer to him as the brave sow rider. "I've changed my mind," the large black dog suddenly said with a shake of his head. Yigao breathed a sigh of relief as a feeling of exhaustion washed over him. However, the large black dog immediately said, "It's better if I find a boar. We can have it sodomize you." "No!" Yigao instantly shouted in alarm. He could barely fathom this scenario. Meanwhile, the surrounding disciples were also drenched in cold sweat. This was far too malicious. Mating with a sow was already humiliating enough. However, being sodomized by a boar? That was even worse. Despicable dog. This dog was genuinely despicable, all the way into his bones. I'll crawl through the dog flap." Yigao's willpower finally crumbled. "What dog flap? You dared to insult Grandpa Dog?" The large black dog was enraged, and he lashed out with his paw, saying, "No, Grandpa Dog has changed his mind again. We'll have you mate with 100 sows first. We'll then have you sodomized by 100 boars. 100 times." Chapter 1472 Ancestor Wenxin. Chapter 1472 Ancestor Wenxin. I'll crawl! Yigao's willpower was completely broken. Mating with sows 100 times, and then being sodomized by boars 100 times. Could any human endure this? He was afraid that Ling Han wouldn't agree, so he immediately charged to the dog flap before lowering his head and starting to crawl through. It was as if he would fight with his life if Ling Han didn't allow him to crawl through. The surrounding disciples all widened their eyes in shock upon seeing this. Since when had crawling through a dog flap become so desirable? Ling Han couldn't help but glance at the large black dog, and say, "You're truly impressive. You actually managed to break the willpower of an eternal river tier elite with words." "Of course. I'm Grandpa Dog," the large black dog said smugly. He was standing on his hind legs like a human, and he reached his front paw down in an attempt to scratch his bottom. However, his claws raked into his iron underwear instead, giving rise to an ear-piercing scraping sound. "Stop!" There was a furious roar as several senior disciples dashed over. They had all become incredibly furious upon seeing Yigao crawl through the dog flap. Him crawling through the dog flap had represented the loss of the senior disciple's face. However, Yigao had been petrified by the large black dog's threat. Mating with sows 100 times, and then being sodomized by boars 100 times. 100 times. These were the two words ringing inside his mind. In fact, he hadn't noticed the arrival of the senior disciples at all. He was mumbling to himself, his face pale as he resolutely crawled through the dog flap. In his eyes, this wasn't a dog flap. Instead, this was a passageway to freedom, a passageway that allowed him to crawl out of hell. Heh! The large black dog was feeling extremely accomplished at this moment. Indeed, being able to petrify an eternal river tier elite to such an extent was something to be proud of. However, this large black dog was far too uncouth, with his tactics more so incredibly debauched. It was very likely that no one felt any admiration for him. Instead, they were probably feeling disdain. "Yigao!" the senior disciples roared. Their voices were like booming thunder, and it was as if they wanted to shake Yigao to his senses. This was indeed effective, with Yigao being dazed by their roars. He then suddenly came to his senses, with his crawling action also faltering before stopping. There was a confused expression on his face. However, this expression quickly transformed into one of beet-red humiliation before again transforming into one of utter grief and desire for death. His name and reputation had been destroyed. More importantly, he was coincidentally halfway through the dog flap. The top half of his body was inside, while the bottom half of his body was still outside. Moreover, his bottom was raised into the air. This was a comical sight. Being as depraved as he was, the large black dog retrieved a staff from his spatial spirit tool before stabbing it at Yi Gowning. Ah! Yi Gowning howled in agony. This was perhaps his most agonized wail since birth. Like a frightened rabbit, he immediately shot through the dog flap, emerging from the other end. Meanwhile, everyone could clearly see the cloud of blood spraying from his bottom. This, as a mighty eternal riveter elite, he had actually had his *S penetrated before everyone. Ha! Ha ha! The large black dog was rolling on the ground and laughing. His legs were kicking in the air, and his iron underwear continued to collide with the ground, giving rise to a loud clanging sound. Everyone shook their heads upon seeing this. At this moment, Yi Gowning's face and reputation had truly been ruined. He was destined to become the butt of jokes now. Whenever people talked about him, they would definitely have to mention how he had suffered a penetrated *S when crawling through a dog flap on this day. Moreover, he had been kneeling on the ground with his bottom raised in preparation. Yi Gowning sprinted away in humiliation, not having the face to glance back. As he sprinted away, all he left behind were 2 trails of glistening tears. Damn it! The senior disciples were burning with rage as they walked over. Their rage was almost corporeal, and the flames of fury that burst from their eyes measured at least 1 foot long. Eternal riveter, eternal riveter, eternal riveter. The 6 senior disciples were all at the eternal riveter. These were the reinforcements that some of the senior disciples had called after crawling through the dog flap. Fortunately, these 6 people were only at the low extreme of the eternal riveter. However, there were 6 of them. Was this not enough to suppress a few heavenly body tier cultivators? Initially, they had been doubtful that someone as powerful as Yi Gowning would fail to suppress a few junior disciples at the heavenly body tier. However, upon arriving, they had personally witnessed Yi Gowning being forced to crawl through the dog flap. In any case, there were only 3 troublemakers. Moreover, one of them was only at the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. Thus, this person could naturally be ignored. In their eyes, such a cultivator couldn't even be considered as an elite. After all, they could defeat such a cultivator with a single glare. That being the case, the only troublemakers remaining would be that man and woman. Could it be that they possessed some powerful saint tool? Otherwise, how could they have withstood the power of an eternal riveter elite? However, there were 6 of them right now, so what did it matter even if these 2 troublemakers possessed a powerful saint tool? After all, they had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. A senior disciple stepped forward and said, "Humph! The Academy has its own regulations, yet you're not abiding by those regulations. You're asking for a beating." He looked around 30 or so, with silver hair and a single horn on his forehead. There was a haughty expression on his face. His original form was that of a demonic beast. However, because his bloodline was extremely noble, he was naturally haughty and conceited. "Kneel!" Empress Wenxin said in an even haughtier and more domineering manner. However, the Empress was far too beautiful, so even her domineering demeanor was charming and attractive. One wouldn't be able to feel any hostility toward her. Instead, they would feel that she had a strong personality, with her smile and laugh incredibly beautiful. In fact, even her expression of anger was breathtakingly beautiful. The silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple couldn't help but fall victim to the Empress' captivating charm. There was a look of intoxication on his face. However, he immediately shook his head to clear his mind, saying, "You actually want me to kneel? Preposterous! Are the new disciples genuinely trying to defy the heavens?" However, Empress Wenxin couldn't even be bothered replying. She directly lashed out. 1. 4 heavenly bodies materialized behind her, each of them radiating with a menacing might. This was the might of a supreme king tier. The silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple sneered coldly. "You're indeed stunningly beautiful, but you're only at the heavenly body tier. What does it matter even if you've reached the pinnacle level? I can suppress you with a single hand. With this in mind, the senior disciple lashed out with a single hand. 1. A silver river appeared in the air. It was brilliant and dazzling, and there were countless heavenly bodies pulsating within it. It was easy to see that eternal river tier elites possessed a crushing advantage over heavenly body tier cultivators. Empress Wenxin naturally wouldn't face his attack head-on. Although her battle prowess was on par with the low extreme of the eternal river tier, her power was still a massive weakness. Xiao! She launched a strike using her brick. The punch of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple arrived, yet its power was surprisingly absorbed by the brick. Taking advantage of the momentum, the Empress then flicked the brick at the senior disciple. Pa! The brick slammed into his face, sending him flying backward. The 5 newly arrived senior disciples were all stunned. The battle prowess of Empress Wenxin was clearly within expectations and far weaker than that of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple, so why had he been sent flying after just a single exchange? What precious treasure was that? It was far too powerful, was it not? After flying for 30 or so meters, the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple straightened his body and stabilized his movements. He was an eternal river tier elite, after all, and he had only been taken by surprise. It wasn't as if he were genuinely weaker than the Empress. He was absolutely furious at this moment. His silver hair stood on ends, and his killing intent was almost tangible as it proliferated into the surroundings. So what if the Empress charming and beautiful? He couldn't swallow this humiliation. Pooh! However, when the other disciples saw his face, they couldn't help but splutter and laugh out loud. Ancestor Wenxin. Achievements that stun for all eternity. Suppressing the chaos. Remembered forever. Someone read. These were the words that were printed on the face of the silver-haired and golden-horned senior disciple. However, they were naturally reversed. What was the absolute beginning stone? Apart from absorbing attacks, its only other specialty was being incredibly hard. It had no other use. Thus, people used these stones as tablets to record the mighty achievements of their clan or ancestor. Ha! The surrounding disciples couldn't help but burst into laughter. The words, Ancestor Wenxin, were far too large and clear. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.